Some people enter your life quietly, without warning, and leave you completely changed. This is the story of a mechanic who drove into a blizzard to check on a stranger and walked out of that night carrying something he never expected to find again. If you've ever had someone show up at exactly the right moment, you already know how this ends. Drop a like and comment the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The last customer of the day had been a pain in the ass. Ryan Walker didn't usually think about people that way, but Gerald Hoffman, retired, perpetually dissatisfied, the kind of man who treated every service provider like a personal employee, had spent 40 minutes arguing over the labor charge on a brake job that Ryan had completed an hour ahead of schedule. Gerald had finally paid, but not before suggesting that Ryan was probably overcharging everyone in this town, which was rich coming from a man who'd once tried to return a used set of wiper blades. Ryan had nodded and smiled through most of it because that was what you did when you ran a small business in a small town. You absorbed things. You didn't say what you were actually thinking, which in this case was, "I drove through 6 inches of snow this morning to open on time so your car would be ready, Gerald, and you're complaining about $60. He locked the front door of Walker Auto at 6:14, 14 minutes late, and stood for a moment under the shop's overhang watching the snow come down. Aspen in December was a different animal than Aspen in the warmer months. During ski season, the town swelled with people who had money in a way that still sometimes caught Ryan off guard, even after 6 years of living here. Not the kind of money that bought nice things, but the kind that bought entire experiences, entire mountains, entire weeks with nothing on the schedule but pleasure. Ryan existed on the edge of that world without really being part of it. His shop survived because even Ferraris needed brake work, and because he was good and fair and didn't try to upsell people on things they didn't need. He pulled his jacket tighter and looked out at the parking lot, where 4 inches of fresh snow had already covered the pavement since he'd last cleared it that afternoon. The forecast had said heavy accumulation overnight. The forecast had, for once, been right. His truck was parked along the side of the building, a 2014 Ford F250, that he kept in better condition than most people kept their living rooms. He climbed in, started it, let it run for a minute while he checked his phone. There was a text from his neighbor, Carol Briggs, who watched Lily on the long days. "She's asking when you'll be home. Fed her already. Don't rush on the roads." He typed back, 20 minutes. Thank you. Then he set the phone on the seat and pulled out of the lot, tires crunching through the new snow, headlights cutting into the early dark of a Colorado winter evening. He had a route home that he knew well enough to drive half asleep, though he was careful tonight. The roads were bad in a way that didn't announce itself, that hid its danger under a smooth white surface that looked almost peaceful. He was on Mountain View Road, about halfway home, when his phone rang. He almost didn't answer. He was tired. His back ached from spending 40 minutes under Gerald Hoffman's car, and he was thinking about the leftover soup he'd made 2 nights ago and whether there was enough bread. But the name on the screen was one he recognized, Daniel Reyes, who ran private security for a handful of the estate properties up on the ridge. "Hey, Daniel." "Ryan." The man's voice had a clipped, urgent quality that Ryan had never heard from him before. Daniel Reyes was steady by nature. It was his job to be steady. "I've got a situation, and I need your help." "What kind of situation?" "The Bennett estate. You know it?" Ryan knew it the way he knew most of the big properties up the ridge. From a distance, from reputation, from the occasional service call. The Bennett estate was one of the newer ones, built 4 or 5 years ago by someone with significant money and an architect who had no problem spending it. He'd done some work on a vehicle up there once, maybe 2 years back. He remembered a long private road and a gate with a security panel and a woman who had signed the service authorization without looking at it. "I know it," he said. "I have a client, Ms. Bennett, who I cannot reach, and I cannot get up there." Daniel paused. "The road up to the ridge is closed. Tree came down across it about an hour ago, and the county plow isn't getting there until morning. I've got 2 guys trying to find an alternate route, but it's going to take them time, and I need someone to check on her, tonight." Ryan looked at the road ahead of him. The snow was still falling, steady and indifferent. "What's the concern?" he asked. Another pause. "Her husband left this afternoon, took his car and drove out before the road closed. There was an argument. I don't have details, but she's not answering her phone. She's not answering the intercom at the gate. And the last camera check showed the interior lights on, but no movement in the main areas for the past 2 hours. Ryan said nothing for a moment. I know it's a lot to ask, Daniel said. You've got the truck, and you know these roads. There's an access path on the northwest side of the ridge, comes up through the Caldwell property easement. It's rough, but I think you can get through with a four-wheel drive and chains. I'll pay you for your time, whatever rate you say. I don't need you to pay me, Ryan said, before he'd quite decided to say it. He was quiet for another second, thinking about Lily, thinking about the soup, thinking about the snow on the road ahead. Give me the access coordinates, he said. He called Carol back and explained, kept it brief. Carol was 63 and had lived in this valley her whole life and understood, without needing much explanation, that people sometimes needed help in a storm. She told him Lily was already in her pajamas watching television and to take his time. She can sleep in the guest room if you're not back by 9, Carol said. I'll be back by 9. Ryan. I know. Thank you. He pulled over long enough to attach the tire chains he kept in the truck bed, his gloveless hands working quickly in the cold, snow landing on the back of his neck and the tops of his shoulders. He'd done it enough times that it didn't take long, but by the time he finished, his fingers were numb and he sat in the cab for a moment with the heat blowing before he shifted into four-wheel drive and turned toward the northwest access. The path was rough the way a river is rough, not violently, but constantly, demanding full attention. He crept along it in first gear, headlights picking out the trail through the pines, the ground uneven beneath the snow and the truck pitching side to side in ways that he just absorbed, hands easy on the wheel, not fighting it. The trees on either side were heavy with snow, and some of them were bending under the weight in ways that looked dramatic but weren't dangerous yet. It took him 22 minutes to reach the Bennett property from the far side. The estate came into view through a break in the trees, a large, modern structure, all glass and stone, set back from a cleared area that had probably been a view terrace in better weather. The lights were on inside. Warm yellow light in multiple rooms, throwing long rectangles onto the snow outside the windows. He pulled up near what looked like a side entrance and sat for a moment with the engine running. He wasn't sure exactly what he was supposed to do here. He wasn't security. He wasn't a friend. He was a mechanic who'd been asked to check on someone he barely knew in circumstances he didn't fully understand. He got out of the truck. The wind had picked up and the snow was coming sideways now, cutting across the open ground near the house. He went to the side door and knocked. Nothing. He knocked again, harder. He was about to try the intercom panel he'd spotted beside the door when a light came on in the entryway and the door opened, and Sophia Bennett stood in the gap looking at him like he was the last person on earth she'd expected to see. She looked different than he remembered from that one service call 2 years ago, though he couldn't have said exactly how. She was 30. He knew from Daniel's brief description, young for someone with her level of public visibility, someone whose name appeared in the kind of publications that got left in waiting rooms. She was wearing dark jeans and an oversized gray sweater that was slightly too big for her, the kind of thing that looked like it might belong to someone else, though maybe it was just hers. Her hair was down and not entirely put together. Her eyes were dry, but not by much. She stared at him for a second. "Mr. Walker," she said. She remembered him. He hadn't expected that. "Miss Bennett." He held up a hand against the wind and the snow. "Daniel Reyes asked me to check on you. He couldn't get up the road." She looked past him at the storm for a moment, then back at him. Something moved behind her expression that he couldn't fully read. "I'm fine," she said. The words came out flat and automatic, like a reflex, like something said out of habit rather than truth. He'd heard that exact tone before. He'd used it himself, once, for a period of years, when people asked how he was doing after Claire died. "Okay," he said. "I'll let Daniel know. You should probably expect his guys sometime tomorrow morning when they clear the road." He started to turn back toward the truck, and she said, "How did you get up here?" "Northwest access, through the Caldwell easement." She looked at the truck, at the chains on the tires, at the snow piling against its sides. Then she looked at the road he'd come from, disappearing into the dark and the trees. "That road's not drivable in this," she said. "It is if you go slow." "In this storm." He looked at her. She looked at him. The wind shoved past both of them. Probably not tonight, he admitted. I'll wait it out in the truck until it lets up. Should be a few hours. She was quiet for a moment, and then she stepped back from the door. Come inside, she said. It wasn't warm or inviting exactly. It was just practical. You're not sitting in a truck in a blizzard. The inside of the estate was the kind of space that took a second to adjust to, not because it was overwhelming, exactly, but because it had that particular quality of rooms where everything had been selected very deliberately, where there was no visual noise, where every surface was clean and considered, and nothing was left anywhere it wasn't supposed to be. It was beautiful in a technical sense, the way a photograph in a design magazine was beautiful. It didn't look particularly lived in, or rather, it looked lived in by someone who was careful, someone who kept things in order as a form of control. Sophia led him through the entryway into a large kitchen that opened into a living space, and he noticed a glass of wine on the kitchen counter that was still mostly full, and a phone face down next to it, and nothing else. No signs of a meal eaten, no evidence of the kind of settling in that people usually did by early evening. She had been standing in this kitchen or somewhere near it, probably since her husband left. You want something? She asked, turning toward him and already moving toward the cabinet. Coffee or... There's wine, obviously. Coffee would be good, if it's not trouble. It's not trouble. She pulled out a coffee maker, and the routine of it seemed to help her somehow. Gave her hands something to do, a sequence of actions to move through. He sat on one of the counter stools without being asked, because standing in someone's kitchen while they made coffee for you felt strange, and because he got the sense that her needing to do something for someone else might actually be useful right now. The storm was loud against the windows. It came in gusts, driving the snow against the glass with a sound like static. How bad is the road? She asked, her back to him. The main one or the access? Either. Main one's impassable until they move the tree. The access, I wouldn't try it again tonight. The temperature's dropping and whatever moisture was in the snow is going to start freezing. She nodded. She poured water into the machine and pressed the button and turned around, leaning back against the counter with her arms crossed loosely over her chest. He noticed then that she wasn't wearing shoes, on just thick wool socks, slightly mismatched, one a darker gray than the other. It was the most human detail in the room. I'm sorry you got pulled into this, she said. I didn't get pulled into it. I offered. Daniel shouldn't have called you. He was worried about you. That's his job. She looked at the counter. I'm fine, she said again, the same way she'd said it at the door, and this time she seemed to hear herself because something shifted in her face. A small, involuntary contraction, like pressing on a bruise. Ryan didn't say anything. He'd learned in the years since Claire that there was a version of I'm fine that meant please don't ask, and a version that meant I'm not fine, and I wish someone would notice, and the difference between them wasn't usually in the words. The coffee maker finished. She poured 2 mugs and set one on the counter in front of him and kept the other in her hands. His name was Marcus, she said, without any preamble, without Ryan asking. She was looking at the mug. We were married for 4 years. He left this afternoon. There was someone else. She said it cleanly, without breaking, the way someone says something they've been rehearsing in their own head for a few hours. There has been someone else for, apparently, a significant portion of our marriage. Ryan wrapped both hands around the mug. I'm sorry. Are you? She looked up, not accusatory, genuinely curious. You don't know me. I don't have to know you. That's a hard thing to go through. She looked at him for a moment like she was assessing something, and then she sat down on the stool at the far end of the counter from him and pulled her knees up slightly, a posture that had nothing to do with the professional image he associated with her name. He said I was never present, she said, that I was always working, that he felt like he was living alone even when we were in the same room. She paused. Which might be true, probably is true. I don't know anymore which parts to believe. Does it matter? Ryan said. Whether that part's true? She blinked. What do you mean? I mean, if it's true that you work too much, that's one problem, but that's not a reason to do what he did. Those are 2 different things. She was quiet for a moment. He wasn't sure if that had landed wrong, but he didn't take it back because he believed it. People keep trying to explain it to me in a way that makes it make sense, she said slowly. Like there's a logic to it. Like if I can just find the right explanation, it'll hurt less. Does it? No. She almost laughed. Not quite, but almost. No, it really doesn't. He drank his coffee. The storm continued outside. How long have you had the shop? She asked. Changing the subject or just moving through it? He wasn't sure. 6 years. I was in Denver before that. Worked for a dealership. What brought you to Aspen? He turned the mug in his hands. My wife died. My daughter was 2. I needed a change. She didn't respond the way most people did, with a rush of condolences and awkwardness. She just looked at him for a second. How old is she now? She asked. 8. Her name's Lily. Where is she tonight? Neighbors. Carol. She's watched Lily since she was 3. Something moved across Sophia's face. Not pity, which he would have noticed and resented, but something else. A kind of recognition, maybe. You're doing that alone, she said. Yeah. She stopped, looked at the window. I think that's actually remarkable. It's just what the situation is, he said. You don't feel remarkable when you're doing it. You just feel tired a lot. She turned back to him. What was her name? Your wife? Claire. He said it the way he always said it now. Not easily, but without the edge it used to have. Without the catch in his chest that used to come with the word. Time had done that much at least, changed the shape of it. She was sick, he said, ovarian cancer, from diagnosis to, it was 14 months. Sophia said nothing. She just sat with it. He hadn't meant to go that far. He'd answered her question and then followed a thread he usually kept shorter with people he didn't know. But there was something in the situation. The storm, the isolation, the strangeness of sitting in a stranger's kitchen at night with nowhere to go, that made the usual rules feel unnecessary. I'm sorry, she said finally. Simple, not performed. Yeah. He drank the rest of his coffee. It was a while ago now. Around 8 o'clock, he found the kitchen without being asked and opened the refrigerator. It was well stocked in the way that a house with a housekeeper or a delivery service was well stocked, organized, deliberate, with things that went together if you knew what you were doing. He found eggs, a block of good cheese, some leftover roasted vegetables, a half-eaten baguette that was still fine. You don't have to do that, Sophia said from the doorway. Have you eaten today? A pause. I had a late lunch. That's not today. He found a pan in the cabinet below the range and set it on the burner. You like eggs? She leaned against the doorframe. I'm not an invalid. I was going to eat. Okay, he said agreeably, and started cracking eggs into a bowl. She watched him for a moment, and then she came into the kitchen and sat back down at the counter. He scrambled the eggs with the cheese and the vegetables, sliced the baguette, and put it in the oven for a few minutes, and put a simple plate in front of her without any ceremony. He made one for himself too, because he hadn't eaten since noon and because it would have been strange to stand there watching her. She took a bite, and he saw something in her face that he recognized. The specific relief of realizing you were hungry when you'd stopped paying attention to hunger. They ate in relative silence for a few minutes. Not uncomfortable silence. The kind that settles between people when there's nothing that needs to be said immediately. My mother thinks I should have tried harder, Sophia said eventually. Ryan looked up. To save the marriage. She hasn't said it directly, but I can hear it. She broke off a piece of baguette. She got married at 24 to my father, who she was not happy with for most of the marriage, and they stayed together anyway, and she considers that a success story. Do you? No, but she's still my mother. Did she know about the affair? Sophia looked at her plate. I think she suspected something was wrong. She kept telling me I needed to be more available, more supportive, more whatever. She said the last word with a slight edge, which I interpreted as criticism of my career. And now? Now I don't know what to interpret it as. Maybe both things were true. Maybe I was hard to be married to, and he was still in the wrong. She looked up. Is that allowed? Of course it's allowed, Ryan said. Those aren't mutually exclusive. She was quiet for a moment, studying him in a way that made him feel like he was being evaluated, though not unkindly. "You're very calm," she said, "about all of this." "I'm just listening. Most people try to fix things when they listen, or they give advice." "You didn't ask for advice." She considered that. "No, I didn't." She ate the rest of her food. He finished his. The wind drove another hard gust against the windows, and both of them looked at the glass automatically. And then she said, almost to herself, "I don't actually know when things went wrong. I've been trying to figure that out since this afternoon, and I can't locate the moment." "There probably wasn't one moment," Ryan said. "What do you mean?" "Usually it's not one moment. It's a lot of small decisions by both people over a long time. You make choices, and then you're somewhere you didn't mean to be." He paused, turning his mug in his hands. "Claire and I, the year before she got sick, we weren't in a great place. Not bad, just coasting, not really paying attention. I've thought about that a lot over the years." Sophia was watching him. "We got the diagnosis, and suddenly we were paying complete attention," he said. "Every single day. We had 14 months, and we used them." He stopped. "That's not a lesson about anything. I'm not saying your marriage should have been different. I'm just saying I understand not knowing where a drift started." "You miss her," Sophia said softly. "Yeah." He said it without deflection. "I always will." She nodded slowly. There was something in her face that he couldn't fully name, a kind of careful stillness, like someone moving through an unfamiliar space, trying not to disturb anything. "Do you think you'll—" She stopped. "What?" "I was going to ask something that isn't my business." "You can ask." She looked at him. "Do you think you'll be alone for a long time?" He thought about it for a real moment, not the reflexive response he gave when people asked him this at barbecues or in passing. "I don't think about it in terms of time," he said. "I just think about whether I'm open to something when it's right, and for a while I wasn't, and lately I think I might be getting there." She looked at the table. "I don't know if I ever want to do this again," she said. "That's a reasonable feeling on the day your husband leaves." She made a sound that was close to a laugh. "That's a very reasonable observation. Give it some time before you make any permanent decisions about love." "Is that advice?" "Observation." She picked up her wine glass, the one from the counter, the one that had been sitting there since he'd arrived, and finally took a real sip of it. "Tell me about Lily," she said. It wasn't a polite question. She looked like she actually wanted to know, and he found himself talking about Lily the way he talked about her when he was off guard, not the careful, edited version, but the real one. Lily, who had her mother's stubbornness and his patience in unequal measures. Lily, who was currently convinced that the best use of a snow day was to build an elaborate series of interconnected tunnels in the backyard and then name each section of the tunnel system after a different state. Lily, who had recently decided that the correct amount of time to spend on homework was 0 minutes and had presented this position to him with such thorough reasoning that he'd almost been impressed despite himself. Sophia listened with her chin in her hand, and something eased in her face, degree by degree, as he talked. He didn't notice it exactly. He just noticed later that she looked less like someone braced for impact. Sometime after 10, she showed him to a guest room that was clean and had its own bathroom and looked like it had barely been used. There were spare towels in the closet, and she pointed them out, and he thanked her, and for a second they stood in the doorway of the guest room in a way that felt slightly awkward. Not in a charged way, but in the simple human way of two strangers who'd spent 4 hours talking. "Thank you," she said, "for coming up here, and for the food, and for not being weird about any of this." "I wasn't going to be weird about it." "Most people would have been, I think. A lot of people are weird about money, or about someone being upset." She stopped. "I'm not explaining this well." "You're explaining it fine." She looked at him for a moment longer than was entirely necessary, and then she said goodnight and went down the hall, and he closed the door and sat on the edge of the guest bed and looked at the window where the snow was still coming down hard, unbroken, a world made entirely of white. He texted Carol, "Stuck up on the ridge for the night. Lily, okay to stay?" Carol wrote back immediately, which meant she'd been awake. "Already asleep in the guest room. Drive careful tomorrow. He set the phone on the nightstand and lay back on the bed, still dressed, and listened to the storm. He wasn't sure what to make of the evening. He wasn't sure what to make of Sophia Bennett, who was not what he'd expected, though he wasn't entirely sure what he'd expected. Someone more defended, maybe. Someone more contained. She'd surprised him by being neither, or by being both and then setting them down. He thought about what she'd said. "Do you think you'll be alone for a long time?" And the answer he'd given, which had been honest. He lay there for a while, listening to the wind against the glass. Bum. He woke up sometime after midnight to the sound of movement in the house. Not alarming, just the sound of someone in a kitchen, the specific quiet noise of a cabinet opening and a glass being set down. He lay still for a moment, and then he got up and went to the door. The hallway light was off, but there was a glow from the kitchen. He found her standing at the counter, not doing anything in particular, just standing there with a glass of water, staring at the window where the storm was still going. She looked up when he appeared in the doorway. "Sorry," she said. "Did I wake you?" "No." He leaned against the doorframe. He could see now that she'd been crying at some point in the last few hours. She'd washed her face and it was almost gone, but it was still there in the slight swelling around her eyes, the particular blankness of someone who'd spent something. She looked at him steadily, not embarrassed. "I keep thinking about the things I didn't know," she said. "Like, we had a whole life. An apartment in New York, this place, friends, holidays, plans. And underneath all of it, there was this whole other thing happening that I was just not aware of." She paused. "I keep trying to figure out how I didn't know." "Sometimes people are very good at hiding things," Ryan said. "Or I wasn't paying enough attention." "Maybe both." She looked at the window. "I keep thinking about a trip we took last spring, to Portugal. And it was a good trip. I thought it was a good trip. We were happy, or I thought we were happy. And now I'm wondering if he was somewhere else the whole time, in his head. If he was thinking about her, and I just didn't see it." She stopped. "That's the part that bothers me most. Not the betrayal exactly. The not knowing. The not seeing something that was right there." "That's grief," Ryan said quietly. "That specific thing you're describing. The way you go back and look at all the old moments and try to find where they changed." She turned to look at him. "After Claire died," he said, "I did the same thing. I went back through everything, every argument we'd had, everything I'd done wrong, everything I'd missed when she was sick. You keep thinking if you look at it long enough, you'll understand it. It doesn't work. But you do it anyway because it's the only thing that feels like something." She was quiet for a long moment. "Does it stop?" she asked. "Not exactly, but it changes. Eventually, you stop looking backward and start looking at what's still in front of you." The storm rattled the window, a heavy gust, the kind that made the glass flex slightly in its frame. She set her water glass down on the counter. "Tell me something about Lily," she said. "Something from when she was small." He looked at her. I want to hear something ordinary," she said. "Something small and good." He thought for a second. "When she was about 4, he said, she went through a phase where she was convinced that the refrigerator light only turned on when she was watching, so she'd try to catch it off by opening the door as fast as she could. She spent, I'm not exaggerating, she spent probably an hour of cumulative effort over the course of a week trying to catch the refrigerator not glowing." He paused. "She never did. She was deeply frustrated about it." Sophia laughed. A real one this time, quiet but real, and it changed her whole face. Something opened up that had been braced shut since he'd arrived. "Did you explain how it worked?" she asked. "I started to. She told me she knew how it worked. She just wanted to see it." He shook his head. "Which is actually a pretty solid philosophical position." Sophia smiled, and it stayed. Didn't fall right away the way smiles sometimes did when people were putting them on. This one was just there. "She sounds like someone worth knowing," she said. "She is. She really is." He stayed in the kitchen with her for another hour. They talked about things that had nothing to do with divorces or grief or storms, about what she was working on, a project involving a kind of distributed software infrastructure that she tried to explain, and that he followed maybe 70% of, and about the mountains in different seasons, and about books, and about the specific loneliness of being good at your work when your work is something most people in your daily life don't understand. She was funny when she wasn't braced, sharp, with a dry edge that she didn't always let out, like she'd learned to hold it back in professional settings and hadn't fully figured out when it was safe to let it go. Around 1:30, she looked at him and said, "You should sleep. You drove up here in a blizzard." "I'm fine." "You keep saying that." A small pause. "Now you're doing it." He smiled. She smiled back, and there was a moment, small, unremarkable from the outside, where they were just two people in a kitchen in a storm, not performing anything for anyone, and it was the most normal he'd felt in longer than he could precisely remember. "Good night," he said. "Good night." He went back down the hall. He lay on the guest bed and looked at the ceiling and listened to the storm, which was still loud, still relentless, showing no sign of having anywhere else to be. He fell asleep sometime after 2. When he woke, the room was gray with early light, and the snow was still falling, slower now, but still falling. And for a moment, in that specific way you have when you wake in an unfamiliar place, he didn't know where he was. Then he did. And he lay there for a minute, looking at the ceiling, thinking about the night. He got up. He showered and dressed and found the kitchen, where the coffee maker was already going. She'd set it on a timer, apparently, or she was already up. A moment later, she came down the hall, still in the gray sweater, her hair pulled back loosely. "Access road should be passable in a few hours," she said, moving to the counter. "Temperature came up overnight. The forecast says the snow stops around 10. "That's good." "Coffee?" "Yeah, thanks." She poured 2 mugs and handed him one and sat down at the counter, and they sat in the gray morning light together, the storm winding down outside, and didn't say much because there wasn't much that needed to be said. He thought about Lily at Carol's, probably waking up confused for half a second, and then remembering where she was and probably asking what was for breakfast in a tone that suggested this was the most important question currently before the household. He thought about the road down. He thought about the woman sitting across from him with her coffee mug and her mismatched socks and the dry, carefully held wit that had come out at 1 in the morning when she'd stopped bracing herself against the weight of the night. He didn't say any of what he was thinking, but he registered it. Outside, the snow kept falling in the soft, diminishing way of a storm that has spent most of what it had and is working its way toward finished. The mountains were somewhere behind all that white, still there, still enormous, unchanged by any of the small human dramas being played out at their feet. Ryan drank his coffee. The morning came in slowly, like most mornings do, not with any particular ceremony, not announcing what it would make of itself, just arriving, gray and cold and full of the ordinary strangeness of a day that had not yet decided what it was going to be. The road down from the ridge was passable by 10:15, the way roads become passable after a storm, not cleared exactly, but negotiated. Ryan took the northwest access again, slower this time because the temperature had dropped back overnight and some of the moisture had done what he'd predicted and hardened in the ruts. He went in first gear most of the way down, the truck moving carefully through the pine corridor, and he didn't think about much except the road. He pulled into Carol's driveway at 10:40. Lily was at the kitchen table in her pajamas eating toast, and when she heard the door, she came running with a piece of half-eaten toast still in her hand and threw herself at him with the full-body commitment of an 8-year-old who hadn't seen her parent in 18 hours and had strong feelings about this. He caught her and held on. "Where were you?" she said into his shoulder. "Stuck up on the ridge. Roads were bad." She pulled back to look at him with an expression that was both relieved and skeptical. A very Lily expression, one that Claire had also been capable of making, which still occasionally caught him off guard. "Carol said you were helping someone." "I was." "Who?" "Someone who needed help." She considered this for a moment, clearly filing it under answers that are technically answers but not really, and then offered him a bite of her toast. He took it, and she seemed satisfied by this transaction. Carol was at the counter pretending not to have been listening, which meant she'd been listening. "Everything all right up there?" she asked. "Fine, just the storm." Carol looked at him for a second in the way she sometimes did, a measuring look, not unkind, that he'd never entirely decoded, and then she turned back to the counter and said, "There's coffee if you want it." He stayed for 1 cup, and then he drove Lily home. She talked the whole way about the tunnel system she was planning for the backyard when the snow settled, about something that had happened at school on Friday involving a misplaced hamster and a substitute teacher who had apparently handled the situation with less composure than the students had, about a book she was reading that she wanted to tell him about in very specific detail whether or not he asked. He listened and answered when she required answers and let the rest of it wash over him. It was the specific pleasure of listening to Lily, the way she turned even small things into narratives with stakes, the way everything she cared about completely, without reservation. He thought briefly about a woman in a gray sweater standing at a kitchen window at midnight. Then he thought about what he needed to get from the grocery store, and the afternoon moved forward in the ordinary way afternoons move forward, and the night on the ridge settled into the back of his mind where things went that he wasn't ready to examine too closely. He didn't hear from Sophia Bennett for 11 days. He wasn't expecting to hear from her. There was no reason she would call him. He'd checked on her at Daniel's request. She'd let him wait out the storm in her guest room. They'd talked through a night and a morning and then gone back to their respective lives. That was the whole of it. He'd driven back down the mountain and she'd presumably spent the rest of the day beginning the long work of dismantling a marriage, and their paths had no particular reason to cross again. He thought about her occasionally. He wasn't going to pretend otherwise, even just to himself. He thought about the way she'd laughed when he'd talked about Lily and the refrigerator light, the specific quality of that laugh, the way it had opened something in her face that had been carefully shut. He thought about the mismatched socks, which was a stupid thing to think about, but which he thought about anyway. He thought, she's a different kind of person than me, and her life is a different kind of life, and what happened up there was the storm making an exception to normal rules, the way storms do. People say things in isolated spaces that they don't say otherwise. People sit with strangers in kitchens at 1 a.m. and talk about grief and loneliness, and then the roads clear and the ordinary distances reassert themselves. He knew this. He believed it. He still thought about her. On the 11th day, his phone rang during the lunch hour, when he was in the back office eating a sandwich over a parts invoice and trying to figure out why his supplier had backordered a specific alternator he'd been waiting on for 2 weeks. The number wasn't in his contacts, but the area code was local. Walker Auto. Mr. Walker. A pause. It's Sophia Bennett. He set down the sandwich. Hey. Hi. Another pause, the kind that meant she'd rehearsed what came next and was now deciding whether to use it. I wanted to call, and I realized I never properly thanked you for that night. You thanked me when I left. I said the words. I don't think I... She stopped. I was still in shock, honestly. I'm not sure how much of that morning I actually processed. That's a reasonable response to the circumstances. I've been told I'm very reasonable, she said, and there was something dry and self-aware in it that made him smile. How are you doing? He asked. A brief silence. I filed for divorce last week. My attorney says it's going to be complicated. She said complicated in a tone that carried a weight of understatement. Marcus he's not handling it quietly. I'm sorry to hear that. It's fine, or it's going to be fine. That's what everyone keeps telling me, and I'm choosing to believe them on a provisional basis. She paused. I'm actually calling for a slightly awkward reason. Go ahead. My car. The Range Rover. I've been having an issue with it. There's a sound, something in the front end when I turn left. I know you do auto repair, and I know that's not exactly in the same category as what happened last week, but I wanted to bring it to your shop if that's all right, rather than taking it to the dealer in Denver. He'd done work on higher-end vehicles plenty of times. A Range Rover with a turning sound was almost certainly a CV joint or a wheel bearing, something he could diagnose in 20 minutes. Bring it in, he said. This week if you want. I can look at it Wednesday afternoon. Wednesday works. She paused. Thank you, and I'm sorry for calling you at work. It's a shop. Calling is how people make appointments. She made a small sound, that not quite laugh again, and said she'd see him Wednesday, and hung up. He sat for a moment with the phone in his hand, then set it down and picked up his sandwich and looked at the parts invoice and thought, she needs a CV joint looked at. That's all this is. And he went back to the work in front of him. She came in Wednesday at 2. He'd been in the middle of a routine oil change when he heard the Range Rover pull into the lot. You developed an ear for vehicles after enough years, a way of categorizing them by sound before you even looked. And he wiped his hands and came around front to meet her. She looked different in daylight, in normal circumstances, without the overlay of the storm and the night and all that had come with it. She was wearing a charcoal wool coat, and her hair was up, and she looked like the kind of person she was, in the public sense, the person whose picture appeared in profiles, whose company was covered in the business press, who existed at a distance from the world he worked in. But then she saw him, and something shifted. A small ease, a slight unwinding of the professional posture. And he thought, there she is. Thanks for fitting me in, she said. Not a problem. He looked at the Range Rover. Tell me about the sound. She described it. A grinding, slight, only when she turned left, worse at low speeds. He had her pull it into the bay and got it up on the lift, and it was exactly what he'd suspected. The front left CV axle was worn, the boot cracked, the joint itself starting to go. He showed her from underneath, pointing out the grease around the cracked boot, explaining in plain terms what was happening and what would happen if it went unaddressed. She leaned down to look where he was pointing, not performing interest, actually looking. How long has it been making that sound? He asked. Maybe 3 weeks. I kept meaning to deal with it. Probably been going a little longer than that. It's not urgent, but you don't want to wait much more. He straightened up. I can have it done by Friday. Friday's fine. She straightened up too, and for a moment they were both standing under the lift in his shop with the ordinary sounds of the garage around them. The air compressor, the radio in the back playing something country that his technician Marco had put on. You want coffee? He said, and then felt slightly absurd for saying it, because he'd said the same thing at her estate in an entirely different context, and this was a garage. She looked at him. Is it as good as the last place I had it? The bar's pretty low. You made that yourself. I'm actually a decent cook, she said mildly. The coffee was fine, he allowed. She followed him to the small office at the back of the shop, which was not designed for guests, and showed it. A metal desk with a parts binder and a laptop and 3 months of automotive invoices in a not quite organized stack, 2 chairs that had been purchased for function rather than comfort. A coffee maker on a folding table in the corner that had been there since Ryan bought the place. He poured 2 cups. She sat in the second chair and looked around at the shop through the office window with a kind of attentive interest that wasn't condescending, just curious, the way she'd looked at everything when she was actually engaged. Do you have help? She asked. Or is it just you? I have Marco. He's been with me 4 years and a part-timer for the busy season, usually. She nodded. Do you like it? Running it? He considered the question because it wasn't one he was asked very often. People asked how business was, which was different. Yeah, he said, I do. I like that I can see what I fixed at the end of the day. You do the work, and there's a result. The car drives right, or it doesn't. He turned his mug. I worked for a dealership in Denver for 3 years, and the thing I hated most was the distance between what I was doing and the actual outcome. Everything went through 6 different hands before it got to the customer. I know that feeling, she said. When my company was smaller, I could trace every decision through to its consequence. Now there are whole departments that run for months on something I decided 8 months ago. By the time you see whether it worked, you've already made 20 more decisions. That would bother me. It bothers me too. I just got used to it, which is different from it being fine. He drank his coffee. She drank hers, looking out at the shop floor where Marco was methodically going through a tire rotation and pretending not to be aware of the person sitting in the boss's office. How are things with Marcus? Ryan asked. He hadn't planned to ask. It just came out. She was quiet for a second. He retained a publicist, she said, which tells you something about how he intends to approach this. What does that mean? It means he's framing the narrative before I can. His attorney sent a filing last week that includes... She stopped, set down her mug. He's claiming emotional neglect and irreconcilable breach of the marital relationship, which is standard divorce language. What's not standard is that he's also suggesting I had an inappropriate relationship with a third party. She looked at him directly. A third party? meaning you. The room was quiet for a second, except for the air compressor and Marco's radio. Ryan said, "I was there one night because Daniel couldn't get up the road." "I know that." She said it evenly. "His attorney will argue proximity and timing, that you arrived the night he left, that we were alone for the night, that I had reasons to want to discredit his affair by manufacturing one of my own." She folded her hands in her lap. "It's not a strong argument. It doesn't hold up factually, but that's not quite the point." "What's the point?" "The point is that the story is out there now. And in my industry, stories don't have to be true to be damaging. They just have to be plausible." Ryan looked at his hands. He turned this over. "I should have told you this before I brought my car in," she said. I wasn't thinking about how that might look to someone who doesn't know the full picture." "I'm not worried about how it looks," he said. "You should be, a little. It affects you too." She looked at him steadily. "My attorney says we can address it directly in the divorce proceedings. There are phone records and gate logs and everything that establishes exactly what the night was. But until the proceedings get far enough along, it's a claim sitting out there." He nodded slowly. He wasn't scared exactly. He was unsettled in the way you got when something complicated entered your life from a direction you hadn't been watching, and his first thought, embarrassingly quickly, was Lily. The shop. His name in this town where he'd built something from nothing after the worst stretch of his life. He pushed those thoughts aside and looked at her. She looked tired. Not the tired of the night on the ridge, which had been acute, the specific exhaustion of someone moving through shock. This was different. The grinding tired of someone who'd been managing a crisis for nearly 2 weeks and had more managing still ahead of them. "Okay," he said. She blinked. "Okay?" "It's a complication. It's not the end of the world. Your attorney handles it and mine." He paused. "I'll probably need to get a consultation at some point, just to understand my position. I'll pay for that. It's Sophia." He said her name and she stopped. "Don't start talking about paying for things. It makes this weird." She closed her mouth. "Let your attorney handle their end and I'll figure out mine, and if it becomes something more, we deal with it then." He picked up his coffee. "How's the rest of it going?" She looked at him for a moment, evaluating or just recalibrating, and then let herself settle back into the chair. "My CFO called a board check-in last Monday," she said, "which was framed as a routine Q4 review and was probably partially that. But 3 of the board members took the opportunity to ask questions that were more personal, about my stability, about the distraction that a public divorce might represent. They asked you if you were stable. Not in those words, in the polite words that mean the same thing. He thought about a board of people in a room asking a 30-year-old woman who'd built her own company whether she was stable enough to run it. What did you say? I said Q4 was on track, the roadmap for the first half of next year was solid, and that my personal life was my personal business. A pause. And then I went back to my office and sat there for about 15 minutes being genuinely furious. Good. She looked at him. Good? The furious part. Better than the alternative. Which is? Taking their framing seriously. She was quiet for a second. My last 3 performance reviews before I founded the company, she said slowly, all had some version of the phrase, needs to manage emotional responses more effectively, which is a thing that gets written about women in professional settings and almost never about men doing the exact same things in the exact same situations. I believe that completely. So when they ask me if I'm stable, I can't always tell if I'm reacting to the actual question or to the history of that kind of question. She shook her head slightly. I spiral on it. That seems like a reasonable thing to spiral on. She looked at him in a way that suggested she wasn't used to having her spiraling described as reasonable. He didn't have a sophisticated understanding of what she navigated in her professional world. He fixed cars. His version of internal politics was managing a supply chain and occasionally a difficult customer like Gerald Hoffman. But he knew something about the experience of carrying grief in a way that other people wanted to manage for you, wanted to put a timeline on, wanted to make neat. And he recognized what she was describing as a version of the same thing. She came back on Friday to pick up the Range Rover. He'd replaced the CV axle and checked the other 3 joints while he was in there. found nothing else urgent, and had the whole job done by noon. She arrived at 4:30 when the light was already going from the sky. Marco had gone home. The shop was quiet. She paid at the counter. He'd charged her his standard rate, and she'd started to say something and then decided not to. And he walked her out to the Range Rover, and she drove it once around the parking lot to confirm the sound was gone, which it was. She pulled back up in front of the shop and got out. "Perfect," she said. "Good." She stood there for a second, keys in her hand. "My attorney found text message records," she said, "between Marcus and the other woman going back 19 months. Ryan looked at her. "I've been with him for 6 years," she said. "We got married 4 years ago, so he was almost from the beginning." She said it with a flatness that was more unsettling than if she'd said it with emotion. "Almost from the beginning of our marriage, there was this other whole thing. I was just completely unaware. I'm sorry. I keep thinking about that trip to Portugal." She looked at the mountains for a second. "Same trip I mentioned that night, 19 months ago, which means—" She stopped. He didn't say anything. "I took a lot of pictures on that trip," she said quietly. "I thought it was one of the best weeks we'd ever had." There was nothing useful to say to that. Some things didn't have a response that improved on silence, and he'd learned that well enough by now. So he just stood there with her while she looked at the mountains and didn't try to put a frame around it or offer a road forward or say something designed to move her out of the feeling. After a while, she looked back at him. "I keep coming here," she said. It was a half sentence, like she was turning something over out loud. "The shop?" "To you." She said it plainly, without making it heavy. "I keep calling you or finding reasons to. I don't have a lot of people I trust right now, and I've apparently decided you're one of them, which is a bit strange given the timeline." He thought about that. "I don't think it's strange," he said. "You know what someone is like at 2 a.m. in a kitchen during a blizzard. That's not nothing." She looked at him steadily. "No, it's not nothing." The light was almost gone from the sky, leaving that particular cold glow that Aspen did in December, where the mountains held the last of the day's color longer than the valley did. "Lily's in a school concert next week," he said. He said it without quite knowing why he was saying it. She went still. "What?" "She's in the school orchestra. Second violin, which she considers a personal injustice, but she's been practicing the same 3 pieces since September." He paused. "It's next Thursday, 7 o'clock. I don't know why I'm telling you that." She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully catalog. Careful, and something else. Something more open. "I'd like to come," she said. Not immediately, not with enthusiasm. More like someone saying a thing carefully, feeling its weight before setting it down. "Okay," he said. "Okay?" "Yeah. It's a school concert. Anyone can come." She almost smiled. "That's a very gracious invitation." "I'm not inviting you, I'm just informing you it exists and you can attend if you want." "That's a meaningful distinction," she said, and now she was smiling for real, the dry edge fully in it, and he found himself smiling back before he'd decided to. She said goodbye and got in the Range Rover and pulled out of the lot, and he stood for a second watching the taillights disappear down the road. He went back into the shop and turned off the main lights and did the end-of-day walkthrough. Checked the lift, checked the compressor, locked the parts cage, and then stood for a moment in the quiet of the empty shop with his keys in his hand. He thought about Lily, who didn't know any of this was happening, who was currently either practicing violin or aggressively avoiding practicing violin, one of the two. He thought about Marcus and the 19 months, and a woman taking photographs on a trip she'd believed was a good week. He thought about the particular kind of damage that came from discovering that a version of your own life had been false. Not the life you'd lived exactly, but the story you'd told yourself about it. How you went back through every memory and looked for the seam where the lie ran through it, and how you couldn't always find it, and how that was almost worse than finding it. Claire had never lied to him, not about anything that mattered. He'd had the ordinary grief of loss, which was enormous and which had taken years, but he hadn't had this specific kind. The grief of discovering that what you'd lost had never been entirely real. He locked up the shop and walked to his truck. The mountains were dark shapes against a sky that had gone from blue to black, and the town was quiet the way it got on weekday evenings in the shoulder season, when the tourists hadn't fully arrived yet, and the locals had the place mostly to themselves. He drove home, parked in the driveway, and sat for a second before getting out. He was going to walk into that house, and Lily was going to be in there doing something that was either very loud or very quiet, no in between, and he was going to make dinner and listen to her talk and help with whatever homework she was in the process of resenting, and that was going to be the evening. That was almost every evening, and he didn't say this to himself as something sad. He said it as something that was mostly true and mostly good, and occasionally lonely in a way he'd gotten used to, the way you got used to most things that were consistently true. He got out of the truck. Inside, Lily was on the living room floor with a book and a bowl of crackers that she'd clearly made herself, which meant she'd been hungry at some point, and he hadn't been there, which he noted with the low-frequency parental guilt he carried at more or less all times. She looked up when he came in. "I practiced," she said. "Yeah?" "Don't ask me to prove it." He hung up his coat. "I wasn't going to. Because I practiced. I'm just saying I'm not doing it again tonight." "Did you do homework?" "Most of it." "Which part of most?" She turned a page. "The math part is being difficult." He went to the kitchen and looked at what they had, and started making dinner, and Lily migrated to the kitchen table eventually with her math and her crackers, and they talked about the math problem while he cooked, and she got it on the third explanation, and was very gracious about having needed 3 explanations, which meant not gracious at all. After dinner, she told him about the concert, confirming Thursday, specifying that she would be in the 3rd row from the front on the left side, and that he should sit where he could see her clearly. "Anyone else coming?" she asked, in the distracted tone of someone asking about logistics. He set a pot in the dish rack. "Maybe." She looked up. "A friend," he said. She absorbed this with the specific attention of an 8-year-old who had clocked the word friend and was filing it for further analysis. "What friend?" she asked. "You don't know them." She nodded slowly in a way that meant she was not dropping this subject but was temporarily setting it down. He dried his hands and turned off the kitchen light. "Bedtime," he said. She groaned with the full commitment of someone who had never once gone to bed without protest, would never go to bed without protest, and found each request to do so genuinely surprising. He got her through the routine and sat on the edge of her bed while she settled, and she looked at the ceiling for a moment, and then looked at him. "Second violin isn't that bad," she said. He kept his face straight. "I know. I just think first violin gets more of the interesting parts." "You're 8. You'll have time." She considered this. Outside the window, the dark was complete and still. No storm tonight, no wind, just the mountains sitting in the cold winter silence. "Do you think I'm good?" she asked. He looked at her. "At violin?" "At everything." He thought about her at the kitchen table, figuring out the math problem on the 3rd try. Still going after the first 2 didn't work. He thought about her in the backyard, planning the tunnel system with a kind of architectural seriousness he found both admirable and slightly alarming. "Yeah," he said, "I think you're good." She seemed satisfied. She pulled the blanket up and closed her eyes, and he sat there for another minute, because he always sat there for another minute, because these were the minutes that he knew, even in the present tense, were going to matter later, were the kind of minutes you didn't get back. Then he got up quietly and went down the hall, and the house settled into the ordinary sounds of nighttime, and out beyond the windows the mountains held their cold and enormous silence, and in it somewhere a woman sat with 19 months of text messages and a trip to Portugal and the wreckage of a story she'd believed was hers. He poured a glass of water and stood at the kitchen sink for a moment before bed, not thinking about much. Or not exactly thinking about nothing. Thursday arrived the way school concerts always arrived, with more chaos than the calendar suggested was necessary. Lily had decided at 6:15 in the evening, 45 minutes before they needed to leave, that the black flats she was supposed to wear were unacceptable because one of them had a scuff mark that she'd apparently noticed for the first time in her life at this exact moment. Ryan spent 12 minutes looking for an alternative, found none that met the required criteria, and spent another 4 minutes explaining that nobody in the audience would be looking at her feet because her feet would be behind a music stand. Lily was unconvinced, but running out of time, which accomplished the same thing. They got out the door at 6:50. Ryan had texted Sophia the school address that afternoon, keeping it brief, and she'd written back, "I'll find it." 2 words, no period, which somehow conveyed both competence and something drier underneath it. The school gymnasium had been converted into a performance space with the specific optimism that school gymnasiums always attempted when asked to be something else. Folding chairs in rows, a temporary stage at one end, paper stars hung from the basketball hoops, a handmade banner that read "Winter Showcase" in letters of slightly uneven height. It smelled like floor wax and someone's hand lotion and the particular institutional warmth of a building full of children and their families. Ryan found 2 seats in the 4th row, center left, from which he'd calculated he could see Lily's section clearly. He sat down and looked at the program, which Lily had helped assemble and which had her name spelled correctly in the violin section, something she had personally confirmed with him twice in the preceding week. He didn't look at the door. He was looking at the program when Sophia sat down in the seat next to him. He'd been aware of her arrival in the way you were aware of certain people's proximity, not dramatically, just as a fact of the room shifting slightly. She'd come in quietly, wearing a dark green coat that she hadn't taken off yet, her hair down, nothing about her appearance that announced itself. She looked like someone's parent or someone's older sister. She looked like someone who was trying, successfully, not to stand out. "Made it," she said. "You made it." The parking was a genuine ordeal. It always is. He handed her the program without making much of it. She took it and looked it over with the same attentive expression she brought to everything, and he watched her find Lily's name in the violin section and hold on it for a second. "3rd row, left side," he said. "You told her where to sit?" "She told me where she would be sitting and where I should position myself to have optimal sight lines." Sophia looked at him. She said, "Optimal sight lines?" She said, "So you can see me good, same principle?" She looked back at the program and something moved at the corner of her mouth. The seats around them were filling. A woman 2 chairs down was wrestling with a stroller. A man in the row behind them was already recording video on his phone of the empty stage, apparently in preparation. The whole room had that suspended energy of people waiting for something small and important. Lily came out with the orchestra, and Ryan spotted her immediately. 3rd row, left side, black flats with the scuff mark. Her dark hair pulled back with a clip that she'd rejected twice and then accepted at 6:53. She was scanning the audience with the focused intensity of someone doing a specific task, and when she found him, she gave a small nod that was both greeting and confirmation that he was in fact in an acceptable location. Then her eyes moved to the person sitting next to him. Ryan watched her register the fact of Sophia, not with alarm, but with the particular sharpness of a child who had been told a friend was coming and was now completing the data set. Lily's face was not subtle. It never had been. He gave her a small nod back. She looked at him for one more second, then faced forward with the studied composure of someone deciding to table a question until a more appropriate time. Oh. The concert was 40 minutes long and consisted of 3 orchestral pieces, 2 choir numbers, and a piano solo performed by a 6th grader who played with the focused intensity of someone diffusing something. Lily's orchestra section handled themselves with varying degrees of success. The first piece had a rough patch in the middle where the tempo fractured and then reassembled itself through what appeared to be collective willpower. But Lily herself played steadily throughout, second violin, doing her part without flourish and without error, which Ryan had learned to recognize as its own kind of achievement. He was aware, peripherally, of Sophia beside him. She watched the whole thing without checking her phone once, which, in his experience, put her in a minority among adults at school events. She laughed quietly at the right moments. Once, when the piano soloist's sheet music slid off the stand mid-piece and the kid caught it one-handed without stopping, which got a ripple of admiring noise from the whole audience. When the orchestra finished their final piece and took their bow, Ryan clapped and Sophia clapped beside him, and he could feel that she meant it. Lily found them in the post-concert disorder of the gymnasium, moving through the crowd with purpose, still carrying her violin in its case. She stopped in front of them and looked up at Sophia with the direct, assessing quality that she'd had since she was about 4 years old and that Ryan had long since stopped trying to manage. "Hi," Lily said. "Hi," Sophia said. "I'm Sophia." "I know. My dad told me." Lily looked at her for another second. "You came to hear me play." "I did." "What did you think?" There was a pause. Ryan had a brief internal alert about what Sophia was going to say, because Lily had a finely calibrated BS detector and generic praise went over badly. I thought you were steady, Sophia said. The middle of the first piece got complicated and you kept your part together. That's harder than it looks. Lily considered this. It was clearly not what she'd expected, which meant it had landed correctly. Second violin doesn't get the hard parts, Lily said. Second violin keeps the first violin from falling apart, Sophia said, which is actually the harder job. Lily looked at her for another moment with the expression she made when she was deciding whether to accept an argument or continue to contest it. Okay, she said, which was Lily, for you've made a reasonable point. They walked out to the parking lot together, Lily between them, still holding the violin case. The night was cold and clear. The storms had moved through and left behind a sky full of stars, the kind of sky that Aspen produced on its best nights that still caught Ryan off guard after 6 years. Lily was talking to Sophia. This had started approximately 30 seconds after they left the gymnasium and was still going. Lily had apparently decided, on the basis of the second violin assessment, that Sophia was worth talking to, and she was deploying what Ryan privately thought of as her full briefing. The tunnel system, the hamster incident, the refrigerator light, all of it, in no particular order, at the confident pace of someone who had not yet learned to doubt their own material. Sophia was listening with the same quality she brought to everything, actually listening. Not the polite adult version, the nodding and waiting for a break version. She was following the threads, asking the right questions, reacting to the right things. When Lily got to the refrigerator light, Sophia looked across at Ryan. He shook his head slightly. I didn't tell her I told you. What did you conclude? Sophia asked Lily. About the light. I concluded that either the light is very fast, Lily said, or it knows when I'm watching. Which do you think is more likely? I think the second one is more interesting. Lily looked up at her. So I still think about it sometimes. Sophia nodded like this was a reasonable scientific position. That seems right to me. They reached Ryan's truck and Sophia's Range Rover, parked a few spaces apart. Lily, recognizing that the adult portion of the evening was probably about to happen, said, Can I sit in the truck? Yes. Don't touch anything. She took the keys and climbed in, pulling the door shut with the confidence of someone who had never once not touched anything. Ryan and Sophia stood in the parking lot. Thank you for coming, he said. Thank you for telling me about it. She turned her coat collar up against the cold. She's remarkable. She'd agree with that. I mean it. She looked at him. You've done something really... I don't know how to say this without it sounding like I'm making a speech. You've built something good, with her, on your own. He looked at the truck, where Lily was visible through the window, apparently examining the visor mirror. She does most of it herself, he said. That's not true, and you know it. He didn't argue. The parking lot was emptying around them, families moving to their cars, the cold pulling everyone toward warmth. Sophia was looking at the sky for a moment. The stars, the dark shapes of the mountains. I had a good night, she said. It sounded slightly surprised, like she'd noticed it and wanted to account for it. Good. She looked at him. I don't have a lot of those right now. I know. A beat. I keep thinking, she said, about what you said. That night on the ridge. About how you stopped looking backward eventually. She paused. I'm not there yet. It's been 3 weeks. I know. I want to know when it gets easier. I can't give you a timeline, he said. I wish I could. She nodded slowly. She wasn't looking for a fix. He understood that about her now. She was just saying the thing out loud because there was value in that, in having someone hear it without trying to resolve it. Marcus's attorney sent a formal discovery request this week, she said. They're requesting communications records, phone logs, gate access logs from the estate. She paused. They're going to find a lot of records of us talking. We haven't done anything wrong. No, but... She stopped. I'm aware this is getting complicated. For you, I'm not being naive about that. Ryan put his hands in his jacket pockets. He thought about Gerald Hoffman and the $60 brake job, and the 6 years he'd spent building the shop's reputation in a town where reputation was a kind of currency, and the ways a story could move through a small community without anyone asking whether it was accurate. Sophia, he said. She looked at him. Stop apologizing to me for existing, he said. It's the third time you've done it. She opened her mouth, then closed it. If it becomes a legal problem, I'll get a lawyer, he said. If it becomes a reputation problem in this town, I'll deal with it. I've dealt with harder things. He paused. I'm not walking away from something because someone is trying to make it look like what it isn't. She was looking at him with an expression he couldn't fully read in the parking lot light. What is it? He said. Not defensively, genuinely. I don't know yet, she said, and then, that's honest. I know. The truck window opened a crack, and Lily's voice came through. Dad, it's cold in here. Turn on the heat. You said don't touch anything. The heat is an exception. The window closed. Sophia smiled. It was the kind of smile that went all the way. Not held back, not managed. I should go, she said. Drive safe. She walked to the Range Rover and he watched her go. And then he got in the truck where Lily had, in fact, turned on the heat and also adjusted both mirrors and changed the radio station. She's nice, Lily said, with the tone of someone delivering a verdict. Ryan pulled out of the lot. Yeah, he said. She is. Lily looked out the window. She was quiet for about 40 seconds, which was a long time for her. Is she your girlfriend? She asked. No. Why not? Because that's not what it is. Lily thought about this. What is it? He turned onto the main road, headlights cutting into the dark. He thought about how to answer that in terms that were both honest and appropriate for an 8-year-old at 8:10 on a Thursday night. She's a person going through a hard time, he said. And I'm someone she can talk to. That's all it is right now. Lily considered this for a long moment. Okay, she said. But it was a different okay than the one she'd given Sophia about the second violin. More like she was marking the topic rather than closing it. He drove home through the dark, and Lily fell asleep in the passenger seat before they got there, her violin case held loosely in her lap. What happened next happened slowly, and then all at once. The divorce proceedings moved into a more contentious phase in early January, and Marcus Hale, Ryan had learned his last name from a local news item that he'd rather not have had to read, made good on the narrative his publicist had been quietly building. The story didn't break in any significant outlet, but it circulated in the kind of online spaces where these things circulated, and it filtered into Aspen in the way small-town gossip filtered. Not as a headline, but as a question, a rumor, the specific social weather of people wondering what they'd heard. Ryan knew it was happening before anyone said anything to him directly. He noticed it in the slight shift in the way certain customers behaved. Not dramatic, nothing he could point to and name, but there, a slightly longer pause before a greeting, a question that was almost asked and then wasn't, an energy that hadn't been there before. The first person who said something directly was Tom Aldrich, who owned the hardware store 2 blocks over and who Ryan had played poker with once a month for 4 years. Tom was a decent man who meant well in the blunt, uncomplicated way of decent men who didn't always think before they spoke. He came in on a Tuesday in mid-January for a battery replacement, and while Ryan was filling out the service order, he said casually, "People are talking, about you and the Bennett woman." Ryan kept writing. "I know. Just saying, small town." "Yep." Tom shifted his weight. "Is there anything to it?" Ryan looked up at him. "No." Tom nodded once, accepting this with the same directness he'd offered the question. "Figured. People talk." "They do." "For what it's worth, most people who actually know you aren't buying it." "That's good to know," Ryan said, and meant it, and went back to the service order. It was fine, mostly. He'd been the subject of smaller rumors before, the natural friction of being a single man in a small town, of being the auto shop owner who sometimes drove up to the estate properties and whose child didn't have a mother. People filled in stories with whatever they had. It was a human thing to do, and it didn't make them malicious. What bothered him more was Lily. Not anything she'd said. She hadn't said anything, which meant either Carol hadn't heard anything or Carol was being careful. But Ryan moved through the world with a constant low-level awareness of Lily's exposure to whatever was happening around them, a parental watchfulness that had gotten more finely tuned over the years, and he felt it sharpening now. He called Sophia on a Wednesday evening after Lily was in bed. "How are you doing?" he asked. "I've been better." Her voice had the particular flatness of someone who was tired of managing their own situation. The discovery process it's a lot. My attorney is good, but every time I sit down with her, it's 3 hours of going through things I'd rather not be going through. Are they still pushing the third-party claim? Marcus's attorney raised it in a formal filing last week. A pause. My attorney is addressing it. The gate logs, the phone records, Daniel's incident report from that night. It all establishes the timeline clearly. But they're not making this argument because they think it'll hold up. They're making it because the process of addressing it costs time and money, and she stopped. And it keeps the story alive, he said. Yes. He sat on the couch in the quiet house. The heat clicked on. I got a call today, she said, from a journalist, a business magazine. They wanted a comment on the divorce, and they mentioned your name. He absorbed that. What did they say exactly? They said they'd heard there was a relationship, and did I want to comment? My PR person told them no comment, and I'm not going to give them anything, but she exhaled. I'm sorry, Ryan. Stop apologizing. It's affecting your life. So is winter. I'm still getting up every morning. A long pause. I hate this, she said. Not to him specifically, just out loud. I hate that he gets to do this. I hate that the thing that keeps me up at night isn't even the affair. It's this, the machinery of it, the way he's turning everything into a weapon. Because you'll beat the affair, Ryan said. She was quiet. The evidence on the affair is the evidence, he said. It's there. Your attorney has it. That case is already over, Sophia. You just have to get through the process. What he's doing with the third-party claim, with the story about you and me, that's because he knows the affair case is over. This is what you do when you're losing, and you know it. Another silence. Then, when did you get so good at reading people? 6 years of dealing with difficult customers, he said. You learn to recognize when someone's escalating because they're out of actual arguments. She made a sound that landed somewhere between laughing and something less certain. He could picture her wherever she was, the estate or the apartment in Denver she'd mentioned having, or somewhere else entirely, sitting with the particular weight of a life that had gotten complicated in ways she hadn't chosen. Tell me something about Lily, she said. The same request she'd made that first night in the kitchen. He settled back into the couch. She's decided, he said, that second violin is actually a position of strategic importance. I don't know who she talked to, but someone told her that the second violin section is what holds the ensemble together, and she has fully internalized this and is now explaining it to other people as though she came up with it herself. Sophia laughed. She also, he continued, submitted a written proposal to her teacher this week requesting that the classroom hamster be renamed. The hamster is named Gerald. Lily feels this is not a dignified name for an animal of its character. She suggested Aldrich. Aldrich. She saw it on the hardware store sign and thought it sounded distinguished. The laughing came more easily now, less held back. It moved something in him, hearing that. The way the tightness in her voice gave a little when she laughed. The way it made her sound like the version of herself that came out at 1 a.m. when she wasn't performing anything for anyone. They talked for an hour. He wasn't tracking the time. At some point, the conversation moved away from Marcus and lawyers and reputation management and became something else, an ongoing conversation, like the ones they'd been having since the blizzard, the kind that picked up its threads wherever it left them and kept going. She told him about a project she was working on, something involving infrastructure partnerships she was trying to broker that required managing a set of personalities across different companies who disagreed about fundamental things, and each believed they were the most reasonable person in any room they entered. He told her about a car he'd been asked to restore, a 1968 Chevelle that a man had brought in from a storage unit where it had been sitting for 12 years, wanting it brought back to working condition. Ryan didn't usually do restoration work, but this one had gotten its hooks in him in a way he hadn't expected, the way certain broken things did. You like fixing things, she said, not as an observation about his job, as something she'd noticed about him specifically. I like understanding how something went wrong, he said. Once you understand that, the fixing is usually straightforward. That's not always true. No, but it's true more often than people think. She was quiet for a second. Is that why you go? She stopped. What? Never mind. Say it. A pause. Is that why you keep showing up? For me? He thought about it. The honest answer was more complicated than yes or no, and he didn't want to give her either, so he gave her the complicated answer. I show up, he said slowly, because I think you're worth showing up for. Not because you need fixing. You're not broken. He paused. You're just in the middle of something hard, and I've been in the middle of something hard before, and I remember what it meant to have someone just stay, not solve anything, just not leave. The line was quiet long enough that he wondered if he'd said too much. Okay, she said, finally. Soft, genuine. Okay, he said. The journalist published the piece 3 days later. It was a business piece, framed as an examination of the divorce's potential impact on her company's leadership stability, and Ryan's name appeared twice in it, once as a local service professional, and once, less charitably, in a sentence that implied a closeness that the facts didn't support. It wasn't defamatory. It was just the specific cruelty of something that was technically accurate in its individual words and dishonest in its total impression. He read it on his phone at the shop and then set the phone down and went back to the Chevelle. He worked on it for 2 hours straight, which was more time than he'd planned. The engine needed more attention than the initial inspection had suggested. Years of sitting had done things to the seals and the fuel system that were going to take real work to address. He didn't mind. He liked work that asked something of you. Marco came and stood in the bay door at one point, pretending to check inventory. You see the thing online? Marco asked. Yeah. That's garbage. Yep. You want me to... Marco stopped, clearly not sure what he'd been about to offer. I'm fine, Marco. Marco nodded and went back to the inventory that hadn't needed checking. Ryan's attorney called that afternoon. He'd gotten a consultation the week before, just to understand his position, and told him the piece didn't cross any legal lines, but that they should document it along with everything else, in case the pattern became relevant later. Your name is in print now, the attorney said. That changes things slightly. How? If the story in the divorce proceedings is addressed and the third-party claim is dismissed, which, based on what you've described, is likely, there may be grounds for a defamation consideration. Not certain, but possible. Ryan wasn't interested in suing anyone. He said so. That's fine, the attorney said. Just keep a record. He drove home that night later than usual, after the shop was locked and the street was quiet. Lily was at Carol's. He had the house to himself, which he usually found either restful or lonely, depending on the day, and tonight it was landing somewhere in the middle. He made dinner without particular interest in it and ate at the kitchen table and looked at his phone, which had 3 texts from people he knew. 2 expressing support in the particular oblique way of people who weren't sure how directly to address something, and 1 from an unknown number that said simply, "Hope she was worth it." He stared at that last one for a second. He thought about a woman standing at a kitchen window at midnight, watching snow. He thought about a school concert and a small person carrying a violin case, and the way she'd told Lily that second violin kept the first violin from falling apart. He thought, yes. He deleted the text and put his phone face down on the table and finished his dinner. Outside, the January cold was doing what January cold did in Colorado, pressing down flat and hard on everything, making the world smaller, pulling people inward. The mountains were invisible tonight, hidden in cloud, present only as an absence on the skyline. He washed his dishes. He sat for a while. His phone lit up. A text from Sophia. I saw the piece. I'm sorry. That's the last time I'll say it. He picked up the phone. He typed. Good. Now stop apologizing and get some sleep. A long pause. Then, you too. He set the phone down and turned off the kitchen light and went to bed. And the house was quiet around him, holding everything it held. The photographs on the hallway wall, Lily's drawing stuck to the refrigerator with magnets, the violin case propped in the corner of the living room where Lily always left it, instead of in her room where it belonged. All of it exactly where it always was, unchanged, reliable, asking nothing of him but to come home to it. He lay in the dark and let the day finish. The formal hearing was set for the second week of February. Ryan knew the date because Sophia's attorney had sent a letter, actual paper, in an envelope, which felt deliberately formal, informing him that his name had been included in the third-party claim and that he might be called to provide a statement. The letter was written in the careful language of legal correspondence, which managed to make a straightforward situation feel like standing at the edge of something larger than it was. He read it twice, set it on the kitchen table, and called the attorney he'd consulted in January. "What does this actually mean?" he asked. "It means they're keeping the claim alive longer than I expected," the attorney said, "which tells me one of two things. Either Marcus Hale's legal team genuinely believes they can make something of it, or they're using it as a pressure tactic to slow the proceedings and run up costs on her side. Which do you think?" "The second, but we prepare for the first regardless." A pause. "I want you to write down everything you remember about the night of December 11th. Everything. When Daniel called, what time you arrived, what time you left, what you talked about, the layout of the house, all of it. The more specific, the better." Ryan did this that evening at the kitchen table after Lily went to bed. He wrote 4 pages, longhand, going through the night from the moment Daniel's call came in to the moment he'd driven back down the ridge the next morning. The specificity of it surprised him. He remembered more than he'd expected, the details sharp and clear in the way that nights sometimes stayed with you when they'd been unusual. He remembered the mismatched socks. He left that part out of the legal account. He sent the written statement to his attorney the next morning and went back to work. The shop was busy in February in the way that Aspen shops were busy in ski season. Not foot traffic, but volume. People needing things tended to before or after the mountain, the particular mechanical casualties of cold weather driving. He had more work than he and Marco could comfortably handle, and he'd called in his part-timer 2 weeks early. The days were long and physical, and he was grateful for it in a way he didn't examine too closely. He and Sophia talked most evenings. Not every evening. There were nights when she was in back-to-back calls until 9, and texted him a brief and slightly exhausted update before going to sleep, and nights when he was too tired to be useful to anyone, and told her so directly, which she seemed to appreciate rather than take offense at. But most evenings. 30 minutes, an hour, sometimes more. He was aware that this had become something. Not the something that Marcus Hale's attorney was trying to make it into, but something. A thread. A reliable point of contact in both their lives that neither of them had formally acknowledged, and neither of them had pulled back from. He didn't know what to do with that yet, so he kept doing what he'd been doing, showing up, listening, being honest. The same things he'd done since December. Lily had opinions, which she expressed obliquely. She'd started asking, periodically, whether Sophia was still going through a hard time, the phrase she'd apparently filed away from the conversation in the truck after the concert. He told her yes, still working through it. Lily would nod and move on, but he noticed she asked consistently, which meant she was tracking it in her own way. One evening in late January, she'd said, without looking up from her homework, "You're happier when you talk to her." He'd looked up from what he was doing. "Than you used to be," she said, still not looking up. "At night, you used to just watch TV." He didn't know what to say to that, so he said, "Finish your homework." She finished her homework, but she'd said it, and he'd heard it, and it sat with him. What? The week before the hearing, Marcus Hale gave an interview. It wasn't a major outlet, a business and lifestyle podcast, the kind with a moderately large audience and a format that prioritized narrative over fact-checking. The host was sympathetic in a way that suggested the interview had been arranged rather than requested, and Marcus spoke for 40 minutes about his marriage, his wife's unavailability, his emotional isolation, and, briefly, carefully, in terms that were technically ambiguous but tonally unambiguous, the circumstances surrounding the end of the marriage. He didn't say Ryan's name. He said a man she'd known, and someone she turned to when things were difficult, and I found out things I wished I hadn't known, and the framing did its work without requiring specificity. He said these things in a tone of measured, masculine pain that was very well performed. Ryan heard about the interview from 3 different people before he actually listened to it. He listened to the relevant segment twice, standing in the shop office with the door closed, and then he put his phone in his pocket and went back out to the floor. Marco was watching him from across the bay. "You want to take lunch?" Marco said. "I already ate." "You want to take lunch anyway?" Ryan looked at him. Marco had a particular way of making concern look like practicality, which was something Ryan respected. "I'm fine," he said. "You said that word again." Ryan picked up a wrench. "Go do the Subaru." Marco went to do the Subaru. He called Sophia on his actual lunch break, sitting in his truck in the parking lot with the heat running. She picked up on the second ring. "I heard it," she said, before he could speak. "Okay." "My attorney heard it too. She says it's actually useful." The more he talks publicly, the more it documents his pattern of behavior. There's a legal term for it that I've already forgotten because I've absorbed too many legal terms in the past 6 weeks. "How are you doing?" A long pause. "I'm angry," she said. "I've been angry for 3 days, and I keep trying to get past it, and I just keep landing back in it." Another pause. "He's very good at this, at making himself the victim. He's been doing it our whole marriage, and I didn't see it clearly until now." "What do you mean?" "Every time something went wrong between us, the story always ended up being about his feelings, his loneliness, his needs, his disappointment. Not that those weren't real, maybe they were real, but it was always the frame. His experience was always the one that mattered most in the room." Her voice had an edge to it that he hadn't heard before. Not sharp outward, but tight inward, like something that had been compressed too long. "And now he's doing it publicly, and people are listening because he's charming. He's always been charming. He looks like the kind of man you believe." "Do you need anything?" Ryan asked. Practically, "Do you need anything right now?" A silence that was different from the others. "No," she said. "I just needed to say it to someone who knows what actually happened." "I know what happened." "I know you do." A breath. "That's why I called you first." He sat in the truck with the heat on and the parking lot quiet around him, and they stayed on the phone together without talking for a minute, which was its own kind of thing, the kind of silence that meant you were still there. "Sophia," he said. "Yeah." "He's doing this because you're winning." She was quiet. "The affair evidence is solid. Your attorney has everything she needs, and the third-party claim doesn't hold up. He knows all of that. This interview, the story about me, the public framing, it's not a legal strategy. It's just damage." He paused. "And damage without a point is just noise. Noise it still does things to you," she said. "Yeah, it does." He didn't argue with that because it was true. "But it doesn't change what's true." Another silence. "I keep thinking," she said slowly, "about what I'm going to do when this is over. Like, what do I do with all of it? The anger, the whatever this is. I don't know how to just set it down and move forward. I don't know what that looks like." "You don't have to know yet. At some point, I have to know." "Sure, but not today." He looked through the windshield at the mountains. February had brought a clarity to the air that December hadn't had. You could see the ridgeline sharply against the sky, every detail distinct. "Today, you just get through today." She exhaled. "That's not very ambitious." "No," he agreed. "But it works." "What?" The hearing happened on a Thursday. Ryan wasn't present. His attorney had submitted his written statement and the relevant records, and the actual proceedings were between Sophia's legal team and Marcus's, in front of a family court judge in Denver. Ryan went to work. He replaced a water pump on a Jeep Grand Cherokee and started the next stage on the Chevelle, which was beginning to show signs of what it was going to be when it was finished, the engine turning over now, rough but present, the car beginning to remember what it was. His attorney called him at 4:15. "The third-party claim was dismissed," she said. "The judge found insufficient basis to proceed. Gate logs, phone records, the security company's incident report. It was all entered, and it was clean." "That's it?" "For that piece, yes. The divorce proceedings continue, but you're no longer named in anything." He thanked her and hung up and told Marco, who nodded and said, "Obviously." Ryan didn't hear from Sophia until later that evening, later than usual. He'd put Lily to bed and was sitting in the living room not watching the television when his phone rang. Hey, she said. How are you? Tired. Her voice was flat in a way he recognized. The particular flatness of someone who has been holding tension for so long that when it releases, they don't feel relief exactly, just emptiness. It was a long day. The third-party claim was dismissed. I know, my attorney called. A pause. The judge saw the affair documentation today. All of it. It's on the record now. Another pause. 19 months of text messages in a family court filing. It's a very strange thing to have it be official, to have a stranger read it and determine what it means legally. Does it feel different now that it's on the record? She was quiet for a moment. It feels smaller somehow, which I didn't expect. I thought it would feel bigger, more final, I don't know. But it just feels like a document now, like it happened to someone in a document. He thought about that. Maybe that's what getting through something looks like. It stops being the whole world and becomes a thing that happened. Is that what it was like? With Claire? Eventually, he leaned back on the couch. For a long time, it was the whole world. And then one day I realized it wasn't anymore. I couldn't tell you when that happened exactly. She didn't say anything for a moment. I owe you an apology, she said. He straightened slightly. For what? The interview. The journalist piece. All of it. Putting your name into something you had no part in creating. Your reputation. Your shop. Your... Lily. She said the name carefully. I've been thinking about what it cost you, and I haven't said directly that I'm sorry for that. You said you were done apologizing. I said that about the situation. This is different. This is me saying I'm sorry for something that genuinely affected you and that I had some role in, even if it wasn't intentional. Her voice was steady, direct. I'm sorry, Ryan. He sat with that for a second. Accepted, he said. And for what it's worth, I don't regret any of it. Not the night on the ridge, not the calls, not any of it. So whatever you're carrying about the cost to me, you can put it down. The line was quiet. That's a generous thing to say, she said finally. It's an honest thing to say. Another quiet, different quality, easier somehow. My attorney thinks the settlement will be reached within 60 days, she said. Marcus's position got significantly weaker today, and she thinks he knows it. His attorney will push for a number, and we'll negotiate, and it'll be over. 60 days, Ryan said. Maybe less. He turned this over. The end of the legal machinery. The point at which the story stopped being an active thing and became a concluded thing. He wasn't sure what came after that, and he was aware, sitting on his couch in the quiet house, the mountains invisible in the winter dark outside, that he'd been not quite sure for a while now. What do you want to do? He asked. After, when it's over. She was quiet for a long moment. I want to do something that isn't about reacting, she said. Everything for the last 2 months has been reactive. Someone does something, I respond. Someone files something, I address it. Someone says something publicly, my PR person drafts a response. She paused. I want to initiate something, something that I decided on, not something I was forced into. Do you know what? Maybe. She hesitated. You mentioned, a long time ago, the first night, you mentioned wanting to do something with the shop, something more than just the repair business. He thought back. He had said that sometime in the early morning when they were on their third hour of talking and the storm was still loud against the windows. He'd mentioned it offhandedly, the way you mentioned things at that hour. A vocational program, something for young people who needed a trade and didn't have a clear path to one. I remember, he said. Tell me about it, what you actually want it to be. He hadn't talked about this in specific terms to anyone. It was the kind of idea he'd been keeping private, not because he was secretive about it, but because saying it out loud to the wrong person, in the wrong way, made it feel smaller or more fragile than it was inside his head. But he told her. He told her about the kids he'd hired over the years as part-timers, mostly young men, a few young women, who came in without much direction and turned out to be genuinely good with their hands and their minds when someone gave them structure and a reason to show up. He told her about a kid named Dominic, 17, who'd come in 2 summers ago through a county work program and had in 8 weeks developed a diagnostic instinct that Ryan would have put up against technicians twice his age. Dominic had gone back to a home situation that wasn't good, and Ryan didn't know where he was now, and that specific not knowing had stayed with him. He told her he wanted a program, real training, certificated, with mentorship built in, connected to actual employment at the end of it. Not charity. An investment in people who had the capability and needed the infrastructure. He told her he'd been thinking about it for 3 years and had the outline of it in a notebook in his desk drawer and had never moved further than the notebook. Why not? She asked. Funding, space, the time it would take to build it while also running the shop. He paused. And I think I wasn't sure I could do it. Build something that size. You built the shop. That's different. How? He thought about it. The shop was survival at first. I needed something for me and Lily. The program would be for other people. That's a different kind of risk. She was quiet for a moment. What if you had help? He looked at the dark window. What kind of help? He said. Funding to start, she said. Real funding, not a small grant. Enough to build the space, certify the curriculum, pay an additional instructor while you're still running the shop. She paused. And I know people in workforce development and employer networks, people who could connect the program to real hiring pipelines. He sat very still. Sophia, I know what this sounds like. I know you're about to tell me you don't need my money. That's not what I was going to say. What were you going to say? He thought about it carefully. I was going to say, why? Why? Why this? Why my program? You could fund any number of things. She was quiet for a moment. Because you showed up in a blizzard for a stranger, and because you sat in a kitchen at 2 a.m. and talked to me about things that mattered, and because I know what Dominic is. I know what it is to be capable in ways that your circumstances don't support, to need someone to build a structure around what you already have. A pause. I had people who did that for me. Not everyone does. He didn't say anything for a moment. I'm not asking to be involved in running it, she said. It's your program, your design, your criteria, your people. I just want to make it possible. That's a significant amount of money, he said. I know. And you're in the middle of a divorce that is currently dividing your assets. My personal accounts are separate from the marital assets. My attorney confirmed that. A slight pause. I looked into it already. He exhaled slowly. He looked around the room. The photographs, the drawings on the refrigerator, the violin case in the corner. He thought about Dominic, 17 years old, somewhere he didn't know about. Let me think about it, he said. That's all I'm asking. I mean, actually think about it. Not a polite version of no. I know the difference, she said. I've been on the receiving end of the polite version. Chet. He thought about it for 5 days. He thought about it while he worked, while he drove, while he sat at the kitchen table watching Lily struggle with a science worksheet about the water cycle. He thought about the notebook in his desk drawer and what it felt like every time he pulled it out and then put it back without doing anything. He thought about the question of accepting money from someone whose life was intertwined with his in ways that were still unresolved, still in process, still not fully named. On the 5th day, he drove to Carol's house in the evening after Lily was settled there, and he sat in Carol's kitchen and told her the whole thing. Carol listened without interrupting, which was not her default mode, but which she deployed when she understood something required it. When he finished, she poured them both more coffee and said, What's the actual hesitation? I just told you. You told me the practical hesitation. What's the actual one? He looked at his mug. If I take her help, he said slowly, it changes what this is, what we are. What do you think you are? I don't know. Carol looked at him with the particular patience of someone who had watched him navigate things for 6 years and had learned when to push and when to wait. Ryan, she said, that boy, Dominic, you've mentioned him 4 times in 2 years. 4 times. You never mentioned the same thing 4 times. He looked at her. Take the help, she said. Build the thing. Figure out the rest of it when you have more information. He drove home in the dark, thinking about that. He called Sophia the next morning, early, before the shop opened. Yes, he said when she picked up. A pause. Yes? To the program, the funding. He paused. I want to build it right. No shortcuts on the curriculum, no compromising on who we accept. And I want it structured as an institutional grant, not a personal loan, I don't want this to be a favor. I already talked to my foundation's legal team about the structure, she said. It's a grant, full stop. The program has its own board, its own governance. Once it's funded, it runs independent of me. You already talked to your legal team. I thought you'd say yes. He almost laughed. That's presumptuous. Or I just know you a little by now. He stood in the quiet shop before opening, the light gray and early, the mountains visible through the window in the clear, cold air. Okay, he said. Okay, she said. It was a small word for something that was going to take a year to build and several years after that to prove. But it was the right word for the moment, and both of them knew it. The divorce was finalized in late March. Sophia texted him the morning it came through. It's done. He was under a car when he felt the vibration in his pocket. He finished the brake check, came out from under the lift, and read the message. He texted back. How do you feel? She took a while to respond. He'd gone back to work and was at the parts counter when the reply came, like someone opened a window in a room that's been closed for too long. Cold air, but real air. He stood at the parts counter with his phone for a moment. Then he typed, good. That's what it's supposed to feel like. He put the phone in his pocket and went back to work. That evening he picked up Lily from school, and she was in a good mood. Something had happened at lunch that involved the hamster, now apparently renamed against the administration's official position, and a substitute teacher who had been confused by the situation. He listened to the whole story, which took most of the drive home, and didn't push anything aside to make room for what he was thinking about. He made dinner. They ate together. Lily practiced violin with the focused reluctance she brought to all practice, and the surprising competence that emerged despite it. After she was in bed, he sat on the couch and thought about the winter. December through March, 4 months that had started with a phone call in a snowstorm and arrived here, at this couch, at this quiet house, at a program that was still mostly a notebook but was about to become something more. He thought about Sophia, in whatever room she was in tonight, breathing that cold, real air. He thought about what came next. He didn't have the full answer. But he had the thing Carol had told him to get. More information. More of it than he'd had in December, more than he'd had in January, more than he'd had last week. The picture was filling in, not all the way, but enough to see its shape. He picked up his phone and called her. She picked up on the second ring. Hey, he said. Hey, she said back. Outside, the March night was still cold, but differently cold. Not the deep-pressed cold of January, but the cold that had some give in it, that knew spring was coming even if it wasn't ready to admit it yet. I want to take you to dinner, he said. Not a phone call, actual dinner. A pause. Okay, she said. Next week, when you're back in Aspen. I'll be there Thursday. Thursday, he said. He wasn't sure what it was, still, what they were, what they might become, what the shape of it looked like in 6 months or a year. He had no script for this particular thing, and he was aware that that was okay, that scripts were for people who needed to know the ending before they started. He'd stopped needing to know the ending somewhere in the middle of a blizzard, on a mountain road in the dark, driving towards someone who needed someone to show up. Thursday, she said. Thursday came the way important things usually came, unremarkably, with no indication on the surface that it was different from any other Thursday. Ryan closed the shop at 5:30, went home, showered, stood in front of his closet for longer than he'd admit, and put on a dark gray shirt that Lily had once told him looked good, which was the extent of his fashion consultation. He told Lily he was going to dinner with Sophia, using her name directly this time instead of a friend, and Lily received this information with the composure of someone who had been waiting for it and was too dignified to say so. What are you having for dinner? He asked her. Carol's making soup. She was already in her coat, violin case in hand, heading toward the door with the efficiency of someone who had places to be. Don't be weird about it. About dinner? About Sophia. She looked at him over her shoulder. Just be normal. I'm always normal.
業界좀
She gave him the look she'd inherited directly from Claire, the one that said, "We both know that's not entirely true," and walked out to Carol's, and he stood in the kitchen for a second, feeling both slightly called out, and underneath that, something lighter than he'd felt in a while. He picked Sophia up from the estate at 7. She came to the door in a dark blue dress and a coat she was still buttoning, her hair down, and she looked like herself. Not the version that appeared in business coverage, not the version that had sat in his shop office with divorce papers circling her life, but the version he'd come to know through months of phone calls and kitchen conversations. The version that said dry things at 1 in the morning and laughed at the refrigerator light story and asked Lily the right questions at a school concert. "Hi," she said. "And Guy," she looked at him for a second. "You look nice." Lily approved the shirt. She smiled. "Good source." He took her to a restaurant in town that wasn't trying to be anything. It wasn't, not a place designed to impress, but a place with good food and enough noise that you could talk without performing the conversation. He'd been there enough times that the hostess knew him, and they got a corner table near the window where the March night was visible outside, the last of the day's light fading from the mountains. They ordered without much deliberation. She'd been here before, she said once with a colleague, and when the server left, there was a brief moment of adjustment, the particular recalibration of two people who knew each other well by voice and phone and late-night kitchen conversations but were sitting across a restaurant table for the first time. "This is slightly strange," she said. "Yeah," he agreed. "It'll pass." "Has it passed yet?" "Give it 5 minutes." She picked up her water glass. "How's the Chevelle?" He'd told her about the Chevelle in pieces over the past 2 months, and she'd tracked it with genuine interest, asking the right questions. Not the polite questions of someone pretending to care about something they didn't understand, but questions that followed from the last answer, that showed she was actually listening. "Running," he said. "I took it out last Saturday for the first real test, down the highway and back. It's not perfect. The carb needs another adjustment, but it moves the way it's supposed to move." "What does that feel like? When something you've been working on finally runs right?" He thought about it. "Like a sentence that finally makes sense," he said. "You've been looking at all the individual parts, and they haven't added up, and then they do. And it's quiet, actually. Not exciting, exactly. More like relief." She nodded slowly, like she was filing that away. "The program," she said. "The grant paperwork came through from my foundation's legal team this week. It's ready to sign whenever you are." He'd seen the documents. His attorney had reviewed them and confirmed they were clean, structured exactly as Sophia had described, a direct institutional grant to a nonprofit entity that Ryan would establish, with a governance board that was his to compose, no strings attached to her involvement after the funding transferred. "I have a name," he said. She looked up. "For the program?" "The Walker Briggs Vocational Institute, after my last name and Carol's." He paused. "She's watched Lily since she was 3 years old. She's the reason I could build the shop. It felt right." Something moved across Sophia's face, not sentiment exactly, but recognition. The expression of someone who understood why a thing was the way it was without needing it, explained further. "That's a good name," she said. "I'm going to ask Dominic to be the first student," he said. "If I can find him." He'd spent 2 weeks quietly looking, through the county work program, through a teacher at the high school who remembered him. He had a lead on a neighborhood in Denver. He'd be 19 by now. "You've been looking for him." "Since I decided to do this." She looked at him in the way she sometimes looked at him. Steady, slightly careful, like she was making sure she was seeing what she was seeing. "You've been thinking about this kid for 2 years, she said, "and the first thing you did when the program became real was try to find him." "He was good," Ryan said simply. "That kind of good doesn't disappear. It just goes somewhere it shouldn't have to go." The food came. They ate and talked, and the 5 minutes passed and then some, and the slight strangeness of the restaurant setting gave way to the thing that had been there since December. The ease of two people who had talked each other through enough dark and ordinary moments that the silences weren't uncomfortable and the words didn't need to be managed. She told him about a decision she'd been sitting with, A potential acquisition that her board was pushing for that she had reservations about. Not financial ones, but something harder to articulate. A question about what her company was for, what she wanted it to become versus what other people needed it to be. She wasn't asking for advice. She was thinking out loud, which was something he'd come to recognize as one of the ways she trusted someone, by letting them hear the unfinished version. "What does your instinct say?" he asked. "My instinct says no. My board's analysis says yes." "Whose company is it?" She looked at him. "Mine." "Then you know what to do." She was quiet for a second. "It's not always that simple." "I know, but sometimes when you clear away all the analysis, it is." She turned her wine glass in her hand. "You make things sound very straightforward." "I make one thing at a time sound straightforward," he said. "I'm not claiming expertise on all of them." She smiled. It was the full one. The one that had taken 3 hours to appear the first night on the ridge. The one that changed her face completely, and he thought, "I've been watching for that smile since December, and I don't think I've admitted that until now." "I'm glad you came up the ridge," she said. "I had chains on the tires. It wasn't that heroic." "That's not what I meant, and you know it." He looked at her across the table. "Yeah," he said. "I'm glad too." They found Dominic in April. He was 19, living with an uncle in a neighborhood in southwest Denver, working part-time at a warehouse and part-time at a gas station, neither of which was using what he had. Ryan drove down on a Saturday, texted him from outside the address the high school teacher had provided, and waited. Dominic came out looking older than he'd expected and also exactly the same watchful quality, the same way of standing that suggested he was always assessing the situation before committing to it. He looked at Ryan for a second. "Mr. Walker." "Hey, Dominic." A pause. "How'd you find me?" "Ms. Arrington at the high school. She said you sent her a Christmas card last year." Dominic looked at the street for a second, then back at Ryan. "What's this about?" Ryan told him. All of it. The program, the plan, the funding, the curriculum he'd spent the past month developing with input from a vocational training consultant Sophia had connected him with. He told him about the certification it would lead to, the employment pipeline he was already building with 3 shops and 2 fleet maintenance operations in the area. Dominic listened without interrupting, which was something Ryan remembered about him. The ability to actually receive information before responding. When Ryan finished, Dominic said, "Why me?" "Because you're good, and because I've thought about you since you left, and that means something." Dominic looked at the street again, a long moment. "I've been working 48 hours a week," he said, "between the 2 jobs." "I know. The program is structured to accommodate a transition. We can work around a schedule for the first month if we need to. And it's free. Fully funded. You don't pay anything." Another silence. "Mr. Walker," Dominic said, "why are you really doing this?" Ryan looked at him steadily. "Because a long time ago, someone built something that gave me a structure when I needed one. And because I have the means now to do the same thing for someone else. And because you specifically are going to be excellent at this, and I want to be around when you are." Dominic was quiet for a long time. Then he nodded, a single, definitive nod, the same way Lily sometimes gave her approval of a reasonable argument. "Okay," he said. Ryan drove back to Aspen with the windows down in the April air, and he felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Not happiness exactly, which was too simple a word, but the specific satisfaction of having done a thing that was both right and real. A thing that would exist in the world regardless of what else happened. He called Sophia from the road. "He said yes," he said when she picked up. She made a sound on the other end of the line. Not a word. Just something that was relief and gladness together. "Tell me about him," she said. He told her about Dominic standing on the sidewalk asking why me, and about the nod at the end, and she listened, and he could hear her smiling through the phone, which was a thing he'd learned to recognize over months of phone calls. The particular quality of her voice when something had gotten through the professional composure and landed somewhere real. Spring moved through Aspen the way it always did. Reluctantly, in fits, the mountains holding their snow longer than the valley did. Cold mornings giving way to warm afternoons, and then back again like something hadn't quite decided. By May, the shop had its full seasonal rhythm back, and Ryan was running near capacity, which was a good problem to have. He and Sophia had dinner twice more in April, and then a third time that became a walk afterward along the river path where the snow had finally given up the trail, talking for 2 hours in the cold dark without any particular destination. He didn't put a label on what it was, and neither did she, and that was by mutual unspoken agreement, not because either of them was avoiding something, but because some things had their own pace and forcing the vocabulary felt wrong. Lily had no such reservations. On an evening in late April, she looked up from her homework and said plainly, "Do you like Sophia?" He looked up from the invoice he was reviewing. "What do you mean?" Like. Not just friend-like." He set the invoice down. "That's a question." "It's a yes or no question," Lily said. "Most things aren't actually yes or no." She gave him the look. "Dad." He thought about how to answer an 8-year-old's direct question with the same honesty he'd expect from anyone else. "Yeah," he said. "I think I do." She absorbed this with the gravity it apparently deserved. And then, "Does she know?" "I think she might have an idea." "You should tell her." "Lily." "I'm just saying, you're always telling me not to wait to say important things." He looked at her for a second. She was right. He did say that. He said it specifically in the context of apologies and gratitude, but she was applying it with the kind of lateral logic that she was very good at and that he occasionally found inconvenient. "Finish your homework," he said. She finished her homework, but she'd planted the thing, and he knew it, and she knew he knew it, which was a dynamic they'd been in before, and which usually ended with him doing the thing she'd suggested. He told Sophia on a Thursday evening in May, when she came to the shop after hours to go over some of the program documentation that needed her foundation's countersignature. They were at the desk in his office, and she was reading through a section that her legal team had flagged, and he was watching her read and thinking about the question Lily had asked. "Lily asked if I like you," he said. She looked up from the document. "She used the phrase like," he said, "which I think means something specific in the 8-year-old taxonomy." Sophia set the document down. "What did you tell her?" she said. "The truth." He looked at her steadily. Yeah, I do." The office was quiet. The shop floor beyond the window was dark. Outside, the May evening was still, and the last light was holding in the western sky, that particular color that Colorado pulled out in late spring, like it had been saving it. She looked at him for a long moment, and he let her look, because there was something in her face that was working its way through layers. The caution that 4 months of divorce proceedings put in a person, the careful management of her own expectations that she'd described to him once at 2 a.m. as a habit she couldn't fully break. And he didn't want to rush it. "I'm not in a simple place," she said finally. "I know. I don't know what I'm still figuring out what I want the next part of my life to look like. Not with you specifically, just in general. I spent 4 years of my marriage being told, implicitly, that my version of a good life was the wrong version. And I believed some of it, and now I'm trying to figure out what I actually think." "That's fair," he said. "I'm not saying no," she said. "I want to be clear about that. I'm saying I don't want to rush into something because it's easier than sitting with the uncertainty." She paused. "And I'm saying that whatever this becomes, I want it to be chosen, really chosen, not just falling into something because we were both lonely and the storm put us in the same kitchen." "I know the difference," he said, "between falling into something and choosing something." "I know you do." She looked at him. "I just need a little more time to be sure I do." "Take it," he said simply. She looked at him for another long moment, and then she reached across the desk and put her hand over his. Briefly, just a second, warm and deliberate, and then took it back and picked up the document. "The legal team flagged this section on governance," she said. "Walk me through what you're thinking." He looked at the document. "Right," he said. So the governance structure is, and they went back to work. Because some things were said, and then you gave them room, and working alongside someone in a quiet office while the evening came down outside was its own kind of answer. The Walker Briggs Vocational Institute opened its doors on the first Monday of September, in a building 2 blocks from the shop that Ryan had spent the summer converting, a former warehouse space, nothing fancy, all function and clean lines and good light. 6 students in the first cohort. Dominic was one of them. The others came through connections Ryan had built carefully over the spring and summer, a recommendation from the county workforce office, a referral from a high school counselor, one young woman named Priya, who had emailed Ryan directly after hearing about the program from someone who knew someone, which was how good things usually spread. The morning of the first day, Ryan stood in the main workshop space and looked at the 6 of them, nervous and trying not to show it, in the way that people who'd been through enough hard things sometimes held their hope carefully, not wanting to invest too much before they knew whether it would hold. He said, "I'm not going to tell you this is going to be easy. It's not. You're going to hit things you don't understand, and you're going to be frustrated, and you're going to wonder if you made the right call being here." He paused. "And then you're going to figure it out. And the next hard thing will come, and you'll figure that out too. That's the whole program. That's what we're doing here, building the muscle for figuring things out." He looked at Dominic, who was standing in the back with his arms crossed, and the watchful expression Ryan had seen on that Denver sidewalk. Dominic gave him the single nod. Ryan nodded back. "Let's start," he said. Sophia was there that morning. She didn't come inside. She'd been clear that the program was his, that her presence at the opening would draw the wrong kind of attention and make it about something other than what it was. But she was parked down the street when he came out at noon, and when he got in the passenger seat, she looked at him and said, "How did it go?" "Good," he said, and then, "Really good, actually." She looked at him for a second, and then she leaned over and kissed him. Not a dramatic thing, just quiet and direct and honest, the way she did most things when she wasn't being careful. He kissed her back. When they separated, she looked at him with the expression he knew now, the full one, the unmanaged one. "I decided," she said. "Yeah?" "That I'm choosing this, you, whatever this is." She looked at him steadily. "I'm done with the uncertainty. I know the difference between falling into something and choosing something, and I'm choosing." He looked at her. "Okay," he said. She almost laughed. "That's all you've got? Okay. What do you want me to say?" "Something more than okay." He thought about it for a second. "I've been choosing since December," he said. "I've just been waiting for you to get there." She looked at him. Then she shook her head slightly, and the laugh came. And he let himself feel the full weight of it, the rightness of it, unqualified, without the asterisks he'd been putting on things for months. He told Lily that evening. She was at the kitchen table with her violin, running through a piece she'd been assigned for the spring recital, and he sat down across from her and waited until she'd finished the run-through. "You know, Sophia," he said. She set the bow down. "Yes, Dad." "It's more than friends now." She looked at him for a long moment with Claire's eyes. "I know," she said. "How do you know?" "Because you've been different since December." She said it simply, without drama. "You've been less—" She searched for the word. "Less like you were finished." He looked at her. "Like you were just doing the same things every day, and that was okay, but you were kind of finished," she said. "And then you weren't anymore." She picked up the bow again. "I like Sophia." "I know you do." "She told me second violin keeps the first violin from falling apart." "I remember." She was right. Lily positioned the violin under her chin. Also, she came to my concert, which counts for a lot. He watched her start the piece again. The same passage, working through it. The slight imperfection at the same measure she'd been catching every run-through. Then catching it less. Then the run without an error, bow coming off the strings cleanly at the end. "Good," he said. She looked up. "Yeah?" "Yeah, do it again." She made the face, but she did it again. 2 years later, the Walker-Briggs program had graduated its second cohort and was accepting its third. Dominic was still there, not as a student anymore, but as a junior instructor, which had happened so naturally that Ryan sometimes couldn't pinpoint exactly when the transition had occurred. He had the thing that Ryan had seen in him at 17, now developed and confident and directed. The ability to sit with someone who didn't understand something and stay patient without being condescending, to find the explanation that fit the person rather than the one that fit the subject. The program had a small reputation now, not a large one. It wasn't trying to be large. It was trying to be good, which was a different ambition and a harder one to maintain. Ryan guarded its size carefully, which occasionally put him in conflict with people who thought growth was always the right direction. He held his position. You could do a thing well for 20 people, or you could do it less well for 200, and he knew which he was built for. Sophia's divorce had been settled for nearly 2 years. Marcus Hale had moved to New York and was dating someone publicly, and had mostly stopped being a presence in her life, which was the natural resolution of things, where one party loses the legal argument and moves on to other material. He occasionally appeared in the periphery, a mention somewhere, a friend of a friend who'd seen him at something, and each time Sophia registered it the same way, as information about the past, nothing more. She had not, as her board had feared, become unstable after the divorce. She had become, if anything, sharper, more decisive, more willing to act on her own judgment and let other people catch up. She'd declined the acquisition her board had pushed for in March of that first year, which had turned out to be the right call when the target company's financials came apart 6 months later. She'd stopped attending certain events she'd always attended on autopilot and started attending different ones that she actually wanted to attend. Small changes that added up to something that looked, from the outside, like a person who had finished needing other people's approval for the shape of their own life. She and Ryan were not living together. They had talked about it more than once, and both times arrived at a version of the same conclusion, that Lily was still at an age where stability mattered, and that what they had was working, and that working didn't always need to be fixed by adding structure to it. The question was still open. It would probably be answered when it was ready to be answered. Lily was 10 now. She'd moved up to first violin in the school orchestra, which she received with the graciousness of someone who had always known it was coming. She'd also, in the past year, developed an interest in the program, not in mechanics specifically, but in the students, in the stories of how they'd gotten there, in the texture of a place that was doing something real. She visited on Saturdays sometimes, doing homework in the corner of Ryan's office, occasionally wandering into the workshop to ask Dominic questions that he answered with the same patient directness he brought to everything. One Saturday in the second October of the program, Ryan found her sitting with Dominic at one of the workbenches. Dominic was showing her how an alternator worked. Not because she'd asked exactly, but because she'd been looking at it and Dominic had offered, which was how he was. Ryan stood in the doorway and watched for a minute. Lily was asking the kind of questions she always asked. Not the obvious ones, but the lateral ones, the ones that looked for the principle behind the thing rather than just the thing itself. Dominic was answering them seriously, without talking down to her, and she was filing the answers with the focused expression she got when something genuinely interested her. He thought, this is what I built it for. Not only for this, it wasn't built for his daughter, it was built for Dominic and Priya, and the 12 others who'd come through it, and the more who would come. But this moment was part of what it was for, the specific sight of a 10-year-old asking good questions in a room where good questions were welcomed, in a place that existed because someone had decided to build it. He didn't interrupt them. He went back to his office and picked up a parts order he needed to review, and the sound of Lily's questions and Dominic's patient answers drifted through the wall. That evening, he and Sophia were at her estate. She was in Aspen more consistently now, had shifted more of her work to be manageable remotely, and they were on the back terrace in the cold October air, which they did more often than was strictly comfortable because the sky from that terrace was one of the best things about the place. It had snowed the night before, the season's first real snow, a few inches that had settled and stayed, covering the ground and the lower pine branches in the way that first snows did before the mountain cold hardened them into something less soft. He was thinking about December, which was almost a year now. 2 years ago, the first December, the blizzard on the ridge, the drive up through the dark with chains on his tires, and nothing in his mind except a road and someone who needed someone to show up. "What are you thinking about?" she asked. "The night I drove up here the first time." She looked at the mountains. "In the blizzard?" "Yeah." She was quiet for a moment. "I think about it sometimes too." She turned her wine glass in her hands. "I was in a bad place that night. I don't think I fully understood how bad until later." "I know." "You walked into that kitchen and made eggs," she said. "Out of nowhere. Just opened the refrigerator and made something. You hadn't eaten." I know, but it was such a specific practical kindness. She paused. I think that's when I decided I could trust you. Not the talking, the eggs. He looked at her. The eggs. Eggs. Sometimes it's the small practical things, she said. The big gestures are easy to perform. The small ordinary ones are harder to fake. He thought about that. About the things that had turned out to matter. The eggs, and the not offering advice, and the staying without being asked, and the showing up to a school concert and telling a 10-year-old the right thing about second violin. The things that weren't impressive from the outside, but were the actual substance of how you treated people. Claire had known that. She'd been better at it than he was, in some ways. She'd had a gift for the small specific gesture that communicated, I see you. I'm actually paying attention. He'd learned some of it from watching her and some of it from the years after her, when the absence of someone who did those things had taught him, slowly, what they'd been worth. He thought, some things you learn from loss. Not because loss is a teacher worth having, but because it strips everything down to what was actually real, and sometimes what you find underneath is something worth carrying forward. I want to say something, he said. She looked at him. I don't know if this is the right time, or if there's a better version of this conversation that I should be having instead, he said. But I've been doing the thing where I wait for the right version, and I think Lily was right that I should stop waiting. Sophia was very still. I love you, he said. Not because of the program, not because of what you did for me professionally, not because of the blizzard or the circumstances or any of it, because of who you are when you're not performing anything for anyone, because of the mismatched socks at 2 a.m, because of the way you asked Lily the right question. He paused. Because you chose this, deliberately, and because I've been choosing it since before I admitted it. She was looking at him with an expression that was doing several things at once. He could see her working through it, the same way she'd worked through the thing at the shop the previous May, the layers giving way one by one. Ryan, she said. Yeah. I love you too. She said it simply, without theater. I have for a while. I was just... She stopped, shook her head slightly. I was making sure I was saying it because it was true, and not because it was easier than being uncertain. Is it true? Yes. No hesitation. Completely. He reached over and took her hand, and she turned hers to hold it properly, and they sat there on the cold terrace with the first snow on the mountains and the sky doing what the Colorado sky did at night when there were no clouds, filling up with stars from one end to the other, the kind of sky that made you feel small in a way that wasn't diminishing but clarifying. He thought about what she'd said months ago on the terrace the night of the program's first day. I decided, I'm choosing this, really choosing. He thought about the distance between falling into something and choosing something, how most people confused the two, conflated the feeling of inevitability with the absence of choice. He hadn't fallen into this. He'd driven up a mountain road in a blizzard and knocked on a door and made eggs and listened and stayed, and he'd kept making those choices every time they offered themselves. That was what love was, in his understanding. Not the feeling, which came and went and shifted and couldn't be controlled, but the practice. The continuing to choose. The showing up in the ordinary moments when nobody was watching and nothing about the situation demanded anything extraordinary. Just the small daily decision to be present, to pay attention, to mean it. He'd learned that much anyway. From Claire, and from her absence, and from 6 years of a small life built carefully, and from one night in a blizzard that had turned into something he hadn't expected and wouldn't have traded. The snow came again in December, as it always did. Not a blizzard this time, just the steady, ordinary snowfall of a Colorado December, covering the mountains and the valley and the town in the clean white silence that Ryan had come to understand, after 7 years, was one of the things he loved about this place. The way the snow made everything quiet. The way it covered the surfaces without covering the shapes, so the world looked like itself but simpler. He drove to pick up Lily from school on the last day before winter break, and she came out with her backpack and her violin case and her specific brand of end-of-semester energy, high and slightly disorganized, already thinking about something other than school. Can Sophia come for dinner? She asked, before she'd fully gotten in the truck. She's in San Francisco. When does she get back? Saturday. Then Saturday, Lily said, as though this had been the plan all along. He pulled out of the school lot, the truck moving slowly through the new snow. She can come Saturday, he said. Lily settled back into her seat with the satisfaction of someone whose proposal has been ratified. She looked out the window at the town going past, the familiar streets, the mountains visible above the rooftops. Dad, she said. Yeah. I think this year was a good year. He looked at the road. He thought about the program, and Dominic with a junior instructor title, and the patience of someone who had found the thing he was for. He thought about Priya, who had her certification now, and a job at a fleet maintenance shop in Denver, and had sent him a card that he kept in his desk drawer. He thought about Sophia on a terrace in October saying, "I love you too simply," without theater, meaning every word of it. He thought about a blizzard, and a phone call, and a mountain road in the dark. Yeah, he said, it was. The truck moved through the snow, and the mountains held their silence, and the town went about its business around them, ordinary and continuing, asking nothing of the day except that it keep going, which it did, as days do, carrying its people forward into whatever came next. There was no dramatic turn, no final revelation waiting around the corner. There was just this. A man and his daughter driving home through the snow, the heater running, the road ahead clear, the kind of evening where nothing in particular was going to happen, and that was, in its own unremarkable way, everything. Some stories end with an arrival. This one ends with a road still being traveled, not because it's unfinished, but because that's what honest endings look like. Not a destination, just the continuing choice to move towards something, eyes open, with the people you've decided to keep. That's the whole of it. That's enough.